Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons. I've got this feeling. I know it's real.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the D's are back in the winner's circle and have managed to eke out a small buffer for themselves in the top four with a somewhat bland win at Marvel Stadium against the Saints. I'll happily bank the 4 points though, but the real test for the Demons comes this Friday night in a Blockbuster against the Lions. We'll get a real sense of our finals credentials and where we're truly at on the weekend. Joining me tonight to dissect the win over the Saints is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Welcome back from Fiji. Good evening to Binman. Good evening to Demonland listeners. Well, we've got the internet back with us this week, so we'll be able to give full and complete reports. So now all we've got to worry about is a weather report for Friday night. Or is that all? Let's find out.
Well, we will find out, and I'll get a weather report later. I think I looked at it earlier. I think we're clear. And before I introduce my other co-host, I'll apologise for our cut price podcast last week. I was off holidaying in the sun in Fiji last week. I fully intended to do the podcast. I had all the equipment with me to do just that, but in the most first world of problems, our Wi-Fi at the hotel was terrible. Simple internet browsing was extremely annoying, and adding to that, the devastating loss in the Alice. I was in no mood to ruin the holiday, compounding to the frustration by perhaps having issues connecting to my co-hosts. And then there would have been the issue of trying to upload the massive audio file, and given the internet issues, it would have taken a considerable amount of time and possibly would have failed to upload. So best result was just to take the week off, and a big thank you to you, B-Man, for providing about 9 minutes of your thoughts on the game. So anyway, we're back tonight with our regular scheduled programming. But joining us tonight, confirm whether we're indeed out of our loading period, is B-Man. Good evening, Binman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. I actually don't often, in fact, I never really listen to the podcast. Give up 2 hours on a Monday night, probably give up another 2 hours to listen to it. But I did listen to our cut down version last week, and it occurred to me my spiel sounded like a hostage scenario. But it was good to see our accuracy rebounded, and I've actually taken my own advice in the last couple of weeks since that game. I've literally not watched any football media. I haven't listened to any football radio, and I'm only sporadically reading Demonland, and then only very cherry picking the threads I go on. So, for instance, there's a thread called Gary Lyon Analysis. I haven't had the wherewithal or the courage to open that that particular thread, because I'm sure I've got no idea what's in it. I could guess, but I'm sure if I read it, my head would explode. And so I feel I'm very calm and relaxed. And I had to laugh actually, because I got home after the game, fantastic win, and as I love to do, get home, listen to the radio on the way home, and then sat down to watch the replay. And at the quarter time, Kath O'Loughlin, who's great, I think she's fantastic, they were talking about our accuracy. And said, all the talk in the media this week's been about our kicking, our efficiency, and it occurred to me, because I hadn't listened to anything or watched anything or read much of Demonland, that all of that confected controversy or whatever you want to call it just passed me by. So it was funny to hear that in retrospect. So, but it certainly was good to be 5-0 after 25 minutes or so.
Well, please don't tell people that your life is better by not browsing Demonland, because that's going to affect business for me. So please keep that to yourself.
Still go on Demonland. I was just, very selective which threads I opened. And
Each week, I ask our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We love the feedback and we'll read them out on the show. And the 5 stars absolutely does help boost the podcast and get more people listening. Ross Millen writes, compulsory listening for all Demons fans, quality analysis by real fans of the Melbourne Football Club with a passion for all things red and blue. And that's another Demonlander representing and helping the podcast out by leaving that 5-star review and a lovely comment. So thanks, Ross. Brizzy D writes, a Demon must, having followed the Ds for 46 years, I've often felt like an island in a storm of MFC SS. The Demonland podcast goes a long way, but not all the way, in calming my frustrations and providing an informed analysis beyond the agenda-driven media bias. Love your work, guys. Brizzy D. Well, thanks, Brizzy D. And another member of the MFC SS Society. Appreciate the review, and hopefully George and Bimman can calm any frustrations that you have. As a fellow MFC SS sufferer, you won't get any comfort from me. So keep the feedback coming. Give us the 5 stars on Apple Podcast, and please don't forget to click the write a review link and write that review as well, and we'll read it out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now Threads, and you want to leave us feedback or post a comment or a question for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week or just slide into the DMs, and we won't read out your full name on the show if you want to remain anonymous. If you want to chat with other Demon fans and you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up, and you can chat with other Demons fans across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. In addition to being able to post questions or comments for the show, there are multiple topics and threads discussing all things Demons related. So join up to join in on the conversation. And I assure you, it's far superior to anything you're going to read on any social media platform. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we're going to talk about, then please give us a call, 0390163666. That's 0390163666. I'll answer, I'll put you on mute, and then I'll bring you on when there is a break in our conversation. And during the week, you can call that number, leave us a message, we'll play it on the show. We've got one tonight. If you are listening live, you can join us in the chat room. Simply head on over to demonland.com/podcast. We'll try to be more attentive to the comments and questions posted there. I'll have to rely on my co-hosts to keep an eye on any comments or questions we receive. We are live every Monday, so if you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. So let's get into the match wrap-up. George, in your match report, you noted that after a string of games in the wet, the Ds had accumulated a fair bit of rust, and it was evident in this match that the metaphorical rust was definitely on show, affecting the free-flowing style of the game that we'd like to see and, in fact, need come the pointy end of the season. Some poor disposal, unforced errors, poor decision-making, and all contributed to that. But granted, that also had a lot to do with the negative and defensive game style from the opposition. Extreme flooding of our forward line by the Saints prevented us from moving the ball quickly, so we had to flick the ball around a lot in order to thread our way through their defences. The D's task in the match was made easier by the carnage that was sustained by our opposition earlier in the match, with Max King, Zane Cordy and Seb Ross all ruled out of the game in the first quarter. You would therefore expect the Demons to run away with the match, given the Saints' deficiencies with their rotations, but that wasn't the case, and perhaps this is an area of concern for the Demons that we will discuss in more detail later in our listeners' questions section of the program. The Saints were their own worst enemy with their defence-only game plan as they failed to take risks and take the game on, slowing down the play only to discover that we were already set up in defence and hence falling into our defensive web. As usual, we were rock solid in our defence and we were able to intercept mark on 23 occasions. Stephen May was sensational with 8 marks from his 13 intercepts, including a spectacular grab, and as well he took out 2 of the Saints' tall forwards in King and Cordy. May was ably backed by Petty with 7 intercepts, Lever, McVeigh, Salem and Rivers chipping in with 6. And the situation was no doubt, in defence, was no doubt aided by the fact that the Saints were down a few tools in their attack. In our ruck, our Twin Towers again lowered their colours to a solitary opponent, and despite winning the hitouts against Royal Marshall, the clearances were even, and Marshall racked up 30 disposals, 10 marks, 7 inside 50s and 7 intercepts. And you combine Gawn and Grundy's stats, they had 29 disposals, 9 marks, 6 inside 50s and 0 intercepts. And we'll speak more in depth about our ruck woes later and give our thoughts on whether resting them in the forward line is working. Spoiler alert, clearly it's not. On the plus side, our accuracy in front of the big sticks, as B-Man mentioned, has improved out of sight in the perfect conditions under the roof of Marvel Stadium. Christian Petracca led the pack with a career high of 4 goals. And unfortunately, it was a case of robbing Peter to pay Paul, a phrase we've used often on this podcast. We need a track up forward, but he's also one of our best midfielders, and we really need his bullocking strength and contested ball work in the middle to help bring the ball into the forward 50. In this match, the D's lost the disposal count, contested possession count, and the inside 50 count against a team with 3 men down. Our opposition, on the other hand, were very wasteful in front of goal, and that certainly had effect on the final result. And given this match wrap-up that you just heard, you would have thought that we lost the game, and B-Man, stop smirking because you're probably going to ask me that question of whether who won or not, and perhaps we were lucky that we didn't. I'll happily bank the win because we sorely needed it, and every 4 points will count on the run home. Boys, anything you want to add, B-Man? I'll start with you. And yes, we did win.
Yes, we did win. And I mean, it's interesting for me because partly to do with what I was saying is not listening to any, like literally not SEN, not, 360 or on the couch, which, my normal stuff, not Sanderson, not, normally I listen to all of those shows and watch them. So it's sort of, and the vibe I get, I didn't go into the post-game thread very much on Demonland, but the vibe I generally get is people are disappointed in that result, and I think
they were,
which is strange. And I think one of the things about the perspective, from my own perspective of the game, it's what I expected. It's what I said would happen 2-3 weeks ago. So when the game follows the script that I expect it to when I'm going in and watching it, then and we win by 4 goals, for me, I walk away, thrilled with the performance. And one of the. So, I mean, I expected us to be tied. For leaving aside loading, which we are at the moment, there's no question. We had a 6-day break off one of our toughest games we've had all season in the driving rain on a soft surface up at the Thingo with travel, which must be a difficult travel to Alice Springs and back. That can't be a normal travel, accommodation, all of that stuff up there. So, it was as I expected. I'm very glad that they also had a 6-day break. So it ran to how I expected it to. But what I would say is one of the sort of curious things for me is the downgrading of the Saints. I mean, like they were 5th on the ladder. So I'm not. It strikes me sometimes as Melbourne fans seem to think we play in a bubble. That team were 5th. If they beat us on the night, they go into 4th. They take our spot in 4th position. It's a classic 8-point game. So, as I say, they're a good team. I mean, we're not playing Hawthorn or Roos on Saturday night. They're well coached. They've got an excellent system that the players are fully invested in. Their game plan is extremely, and we'll talk a bit more about this later, is extremely similar to ours. Extremely similar. So it was tactically, I found it a fascinating game to watch. It was a really interesting game to watch from a tactical perspective. They're super well coached. They're really hard to score against. They're the hardest team in the AFL to score against, particularly at Marvel, their home deck. It's their game plan is built for Marvel. And that's a really hard ground to get through zone defences because it's so narrow that you can't stretch it the way you can opposition the way at the MCG. I thought Marshall was absolutely brilliant. He's an absolute star. Sinclair's a star. They've got some real quality young players, particularly up forward. They've got some really good players. So, just leaving aside anything else, we won by 4 goals. So forget the caveats, the asterisks, anything you want to say about that game. The Saints are 5th on the ladder, remain 5th on the ladder, I think, don't they? Or perhaps they've dropped down to 6.
Well, they've dropped with Essendon, yeah.
Would have taken our position in the top 4 had they won that game. And so we're well and truly past the halfway part of the season. So it's not like we got Saints 4 games into the season and therefore we could, say, oh, well, they're going well now, but they'll fall away. They're well past the halfway mark of the season. For a team to be 5th on the ladder, that's their deserved spot on the ladder. So they're better than 13 other teams, and we've beat them by 4 goals. So I can't see how it's possible to be, frustrated by getting 4 points with a 4-goal win when we kept them to, whatever it was, 50, 60 points. So, I thought it was a fascinating game, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thoroughly enjoyed watching the replay.
We'll talk. I'll give George. You could talk in a sec. We'll get the thoughts about this. What I'm just about to say soon, because we've got a question about it. But I think some of the frustration from D's fans was not about anything you've just said, because that's all good, but the fact that they were 3 men down.
So what?
I
Like,
think
how often does that happen to us? And like, why are Demons fans always looking for an asterisk? And we beat them, so of course they were 3 down. So yeah, great. No, they didn't win. You see how frustrated? Did you watch the presser afterwards? See how frustrated Lion was, and we might talk about that a bit later. But I mean, if you want to search for an asterisk or a reason why it's bad, well, then sure, it was terrible. We won by 4 goals against an undermanned Saints. There you go.
Okay, thank you, George.
Yeah, I have to agree with pretty well everything that Binman said. People underestimate the Saints at their own to their own peril. Though they are extraordinarily hard to beat. It's the Ross Lyon method of coaching. He's been doing it for well over 10 years now. It hasn't produced premierships for him, but he's managed over many years to get the teams into finals, both at St Kilda and at Fremantle. But they are extraordinarily hard to beat. And just as an example for this year, when they played Collingwood won by 1 goal. Against Port won by 7 points. Against Brisbane, the third team that's out in the top 4, Brisbane won by 28 points, but at halftime the difference was 23. So St Kilda held Brisbane to 5 points, basically better in the second half. They are really hard to stop. It's the Ross Lyon method of operation. It is boring to watch, as from a spectator's point of view. They hope to stay in the match for as long as possible to be able to be within striking range of a win at the end, but it's boring football to watch. The question that'll be on the St Kilda supporters' minds in the coming couple of years while he's there is, has it improved us anything? Yes, it stopped the carnage. It stops you losing. It stops you getting thrashed. Everybody has hope. Does it get you to the end? Let's wait and see. It hasn't proved to be the case both at St Kilda previously and Fremantle. Yeah, I'm not all that surprised. I also am not all that impressed with his techniques. I think he's been out of the system too long. Switching the ball slowly across the back line, I lost count of the number of times where I was saying to the person sitting next to me, wait for the intercept at half back, here it comes, because it was just an old technique being used when the top teams in the competition these days are driving quickly and fast. If you're going to switch, you have to do it very, very fast to beat. Melbourne were always set up in this game, and that's why the ball just kept on bouncing from one side to the other and then back again, and we'd repeat the same sort of thing. So sadly for the fans, it wasn't a great game to watch, but we got the 4 points in the end.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a really interesting game. A terrific game to watch. I thought because of that tactical stuff, and you're right, George, that, I mean, they've got a very similar philosophy, Goodwin and Lyon, about defense first wins grand finals. In some ways, Lyon's a bit of a victim of his own coaching ability because he's taken some undermanned teams to levels beyond that they otherwise would. But this team, I think, has got some real quality. So it's got some good signs for the future, the Saints, I mean. But your point about switching is really interesting because I was sitting behind the goals. And so, of course, you can see it really clearly, that switch. And it just strikes, it's already within a year. And, credit to Collingwood, Melbourne too, because that's the very sort of definition of the difference between that's the way the Dogs used to play, and the way football's changed. Richmond's changed it. Melbourne took that template. Geelong took the same template last year. It's been the secret of success since 2017, which is territory. And when you hear people talk about territory, what it means is you don't switch it straight across the ground. You go straight up the ground. You go towards the goal. And it really struck me in that game, George, how unusual it felt to see so much switching, because 2-3 years ago, that's 2016 when the Dogs won the flag. That's exactly what they did. They stretched the whole ground and made it really difficult for zones to set up. Now the zones, all teams have got such sophisticated zone system, particularly Melbourne. I mean, one of the really cool things to watch from up behind the goals was our system moving across as they switched it. And in modern footy, if you've got a good defensive zone like that, it's just, it's a killer, isn't it, George? Because you can't, so what? You switch it across for what? purpose, all that does, any slowdown of the opposition now just lets opposition defences get set. And, you saw what happened when we're able to get set. It just meant we're crazy with the intercept marking. So it just plays directly into our hands. But, I thought they were super well coached. They easily could have won that game. And it's just a funny thing, football, in terms of, we played better against the Giants. That's just a fact. And we were clearly fatigued in this particular game. I thought Goody coached really well, but I thought Lyon did too. And I found it a really entertaining match tactically. And there was some really interesting bits to it. And they've got some bloody good players. And as I said, geez, I haven't watched them live since last year. Marshall is a gun, isn't he? He's so
fantastic. Yeah.
And I just love to see good footballers like that. I think, as I've said before, I rarely can remember when I watch it live. I can rarely remember the opposition players. If they can get 30 possessions, I wouldn't have a clue. Like
Filippo.
He took us, when I watched back at home, the replay, that mark he took was an absolute fantastic grab. And I didn't realise it was him when he took it, but he's only 18, I think, or 19.
Yeah.
So, super talented young man, but, you couldn't help but notice Marshall. He was dominant, and, geez, he seemed like we were kicking the ball to him. And it seemed like how teams used to 2 or 3 years ago were kicking to Max all the time. We were kicking to Marshall. So, good to get the 4 points. Super important to get those 4 points, that's for sure.
So, Big Man, let's get into stats files. Take it away.
So it was a really, really interesting game, as I said, from a tactical perspective, and the stats really reflect it. We've got a very similar defensive philosophy. We've got a different system, but they also play that the goalkeeper, for want of a better phrase, so someone dropping back in that sort of triangle shape, and their transition is different to ours. But philosophically, they're very similar, Lyon and Goodwin, and I thought it was an absolutely fascinating game tactically, and the stats really bore that out. So, the key Demon stats are arguably also the key Saints stats, and they were so similar right through the match. So metres gained was plus 45 to us, so bugger all, nothing. Inside 50s, they had 6 more inside 50s than us, which was, that's very un-Melbourne-like, very Saints-like though. So, that's the way they want to play their forward half footy team. And there's a question about that, trapping it in the forward half, which is a really interesting question because I've been pondering it. So I won't talk about that now. They had contested possessions, had 8 more contested possessions than us, which is a big number for them. So it's really important for them. I think they're number 1 or 2 in the AFL possessions, up with us. Ground ball gets, which has been an area of concern for us, but we've got better this season at it, much, much better. But they won 8 more ground balls than us. This one was really interesting. Intercepts were 76 apiece, which is, again, we like to score from our intercepts, so they matched us in that area. We only had +3 intercept marks. So for all the talk about how dominant May was, and how many intercept marks did you say you had, Andy?
I think he took 8 or 9 intercept marks.
Yeah, so they one of our players had 8 or 9 intercepts, and I reckon Riv probably had a couple as well. Well, at the end of the day, that we only got, I wonder how many. I don't know how many Marshall got, but at the end of the day, we had only 3 more intercept marks. Despite Marshall's dominance, we matched them in clearances. We had more hit-outs. We had 1 more hit-out to advantage. They were +8 in tackles. This one was really stood out for me, this number, and this is really St Kilda, the way Lyon likes to play. They beat us 7. They were +7 in tackles inside 50, which was a big number for them. This one was really interesting because the pressure stats, because I watched the replay, and it was at Channel 7 mustn't have access to this particular data, and Darcy was talking about, well, this is finals like pressure, and I was thinking, didn't feel like that at the ground. It felt sort of, I thought it was an unusual game because, we were moving the ball from side to side ourselves. We were doing more switching than we normally was, and it didn't feel that high pressure, and that's what the numbers indicate. So first quarter, 176 to 173, 174 to 169 in the second quarter, 178 to 186 in the third quarter. So they came out after halftime. This is the one that's really interesting, and I'll touch on this a bit later. But in the last quarter, our pressure dropped almost to a season low of 158. I think 153 is our season low for a quarter of footy. So 158 in that last quarter. And I thought that was, that's for me a good indicator of fatigue. They had dropped 2, but 172. So for the match, it was 172 for 175 across the match. And remembering that 200 is elite and 180 is AFL average. So at no point in that match did we get above AFL average. They did in the third quarter. And in the last quarter, we dropped way below AFL average. So to come away with a win with those pressure numbers, if you compare them to previous week, our pressure rating and our pressure numbers were huge. Not huge, much better than that last week against the Giants. The pressure.
So what you're saying is that Darcy has no idea what he's talking about.
Well, when I watch the replay, the commentators don't annoy me at all. When I watch it live, he would have driven me nuts because, obviously I knew the result. So I don't know what you guys felt at the ground. Did it feel like a pressure? It didn't feel that.
Absolutely not. And that's, like I said, that's the way that Lion plays. It's an all
it was
field
a boring
zone defence. It's not.
It was a boring game.
Yeah. There was plenty of room between the players simply because he floods continually into the back line to stop the opposition scoring. So we had our players looking around for where to kick the ball, which is most unusual. But they were doing the same thing. So it was this constant back and forth that was going on. It wasn't attack the man and get the ball off the man. It was wait for the intercept. And as you know, both sides have had huge numbers of intercepts relatively. It just kept going back the other way.
And I can see the logic. When I was coaching my son's basketball, we weren't very good, and we're often coming up against really good teams. And, what's the best way to stop really good teams scoring against you? Don't let them have the ball. Keep the ball yourself. Keep it in the back half, no shot clock. Just run it down. And that's basically Lions' game plan, isn't it, George?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And you hope that either you have one or two good forwards, which unfortunately they haven't got at the moment, or you just hope that you're in the game and you can snag a goal or two per chance that gets you over the line.
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly like you say. He coaches to stay in the game, and it's really just going back to your point about their record against Collingwood and Port in particular. People downplay or mark us down for this result. I don't recall a single post on Demonland saying about that 6-point loss against the Saints Collingwood game. The Saints should have won that game. I remember that really clearly. I don't recall a single media person or a single post on Demonland other than my post saying, well, where's the sort of critique about, they couldn't pull away from Saints? Everyone thinks that's fine, except when Melbourne play them. So the pressure points is individual pressure points is really interesting this week. Pressure points are the weighed sum of pressure acts. Physical pressure acts are worth 3.75 points. Closing acts are 2.25 points. Chasing acts are 1.5 points. And corralling are 1.2 points. So the individual player, Gus had the most pressure acts for the Ds, 27 pressure acts. Pressure points were 65. This was really striking. So I thought he had a great game, Gus. Fantastic game. And I was surprised that he didn't get more, credit for his game. But his season average, so in this game he had 27 pressure acts for 65 points using the totals above. His season average is 30.6, more than twice his season average of pressure he applied in this game. Jack Viney was second, and 59. His season average is 54, so right just about it, but still above his season average. This one, and we'll talk about Cozzy a bit later, I'm sure, but Cozzy was third, 26 pressure acts and 56 pressure points. His season average is 43, which is high for a small forward. So again, that's significantly higher than his average. Spargo, again, gets his criticism each week. I really think that people don't fully understand the role he plays, but he was fourth pressure acts with 24, pressure points 49. His season average is 26. So again, not far off twice his season average for amount of pressure. Similarly, JJ had a great game, I thought. 20 pressure acts, 36 pressure points. His season average is 20. Again, almost twice his season average. So that's really important in a mid-season game like this. And Nibbler, of course, he's always up there. 19 pressure acts, he was in 6. 34 pressure points, but it was interesting for him. He was well down on his season average, which is 49. The other one that was really interesting is Track. Track had only 15 pressure acts, and now he played up forward a fair bit for 34 pressure points, but his season average is 48. So like Nibbler, 49 actually, 48.9. So like Nibbler, both of them dropped a fair way away. One of the ones down the bottom, near the table, Jake Lever had 15 pressure acts. His season average is 14.5, but in this game he was 32, and I thought he played fantastic. One of the things for Melbourne, as I've talked about, forward half footy, this is a really good measure, and this is an important stat for the club, as I've noted before on the board. It's always on the board, shown to the players, time in forward half at each of the breaks, quarter, half time, three-quarter time. In that first quarter, and we'll talk about this, what that means for accuracy a bit later, but first quarter, they had that in their forward half 69% of the time, 31% for us. The third quarter was the only quarter we had more of the ball in our half, 64 to 36 in the third quarter, and then it fell away, mirroring the pressure drop-off in that last quarter, 39 to 61. So they were actually 54-46, and I have to go check, but I don't reckon we've been beaten. If we have, no more than once or twice this season in that particular stat. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's the first time a team's had more time in the forward half than us. So I thought that was really curious. We, for all the sort of critique of the Max and Brodie, we were +6 from scores from centre bounce, +13 stoppages. And just finally, the turnover stats were interesting because, as I've noted before, it's our key scoring source. As Lever said in an interview I heard him after the game, he said, football's shifted now. Turnover is the most important way for teams to score. We only were +2, 46 to 44 in turnover. So again, it's partly because they like to play that game too, but that's not a good number for us. We're looking for a +20 unscores from turnover or something like that. So just the final thing, just as the points from defensive half were really unusual. So our average points from, and this is because they dominated the territory, not us. So this was like a mirror of the GWS game last week. So our season average for points from defensive half, 34.6, and in this game we scored 51 points from defensive half. The season average for the Saints. Not for the Saints. The teams against us is 22.6, but the Saints could only manage 8 in this game. So we stopped them scoring at all from the defensive half, partly because it was in their forward zone for a fair bit of it. Just the final thing, is in that last quarter, one of the things I really enjoyed about this match was the re-emergence of us playing tempo footy. That's something that was a real feature of the first half of 22 and definitely in 21, our ability to control the tempo of the game and take it away from the opposition. In that last quarter, they had double the number of inside 50s than us. So it was 14-7, I think it might have been, ended up 15-8 or something like that. But both teams scored 2-2. So this was at the 25-minute mark, so that might have changed in the last 5 minutes. The D's played on from a mark just 5% of the last time in the last quarter, and the Saints, who needed to chase us down, obviously, trying to increase the tempo and getting the ball movement, they played on 21% of the time after a mark. But that, not playing on after a mark only 5% of the time, was that really unusual for us, and it was how we controlled the tempo. The big one really was the most fascinating stat for me was the expected score. So the expected scores were 61 to 68 their way. So a loss on expected scores was really ironic given all of the palaver in the media in the last few weeks about our so-called efficiency. But it was an accurate reflection of the game, I think. The Saints played super well. And I assume, I don't know if you listened to the presser, as I said before, but Lyon was rabbiting on about score equity. He mentioned it a few times. I mean, why talk about it if you're not going to explain it? But he was referring to score equity in his presser, and he's noted that they won on score equity. So I'm assuming that's the same thing as expected scores, and actually derided the media for not analysing with quote unquote all your resources the score equity. But Champion Data could provide that for free to everyone if the AFL would let them.
Big man, I'm not sure if you're broadcasting from my hotel in Fiji because you're breaking up a couple of times there, but we'll see how we're going. George, did you want to add anything to Big Man stats? Anything?
No.
Right.
I'm not a stats man. Bin man's a stats man.
Well, it might be. I reckon this could be my internet that's stuffing up because George, did you hear Big Man breaking up at all?
Yeah, he's fine to me.
He was fine, so it's my internet. That's
Are
fine.
you still in Fiji?
Yeah.
I could still be in Fiji. I don't know. Our internet at home has actually been a bit dodgy of late. So anyway, we'll see how we go.
Pay your bill, Andy. Pay your bill.
But I know. Matt Demon in the chat room has said, Big Man, surely you can't still have us as premiership favourites.
Well, we're not, but they're good value now at $8, $7, $8. So this is a conversation we're having this time last year. So I loaded up this time last year. I lost that bet, but I loaded up the previous year, and so I'm well ahead. I'm well ahead on those two bets. So time to get on. So Collingwood I would have Collingwood favourite, but we should be much shorter than what we are.
And for all you children out there, remember to gamble responsibly.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's my line. Travi14 says Gus back in the middle, his best position. So we don't have any questions about Gus. So what do you think about that? Gus did play a considerable amount of time in the middle. I don't know what the time stats were of him in the midfield or centre bounce attendances. Do you have any of those stats? But also, what did you think of his game in the middle?
I do actually have the stats, but I thought he played great. Owing that pressure that I was mentioning before, his pressure was fantastic, and his kicking was a bit frustrating the previous week, and it is still. I think you just got to accept that with him. He was, but his ability to kick on his left foot long, I think, is a really, really important, sort of point of difference that he's got. I'm not sure whether it is his best position, to be honest. It's probably where he's played his most football that's attracted the most attention, but I actually think he's playing that halfback sort of intercepting role was his best role. But he was fantastic. He was at 15 centre bounce attendances, so his average this last year was 16%. His average in this year is 21% of centre bounce attendances. In this particular match, he was at 62% of all centre bounce attendances. He was at pure mid really.
Without Clary and with Track playing mostly forward, he sort of has to.
It's interesting to say Track like he did, but he still was at 50%. Track was still at 50% of centre bounce attendances. You wouldn't have guessed it from the commentators on the telly, would you? So, interestingly, George Brody was only at 42%. He only went to 10 centre bounces.
Yeah.
Jordan, JJ went to most. He was 17 centre bounce attendances, 71% of all of them, well up from his season average of 22.8.
I think we should be grateful that we've got someone like Gus, in the absence of an Oliver and, a Petracca for effectively for half the game, that you can put him into the middle. If you've got a problem down back, he can go down back. You've got a problem on the wing, he can go play wing. We've seen his ability to move forward as well. He is the genuine swing man that any coach would love to have a player of that capability. We're very fortunate we've got him going at the moment. Like Andy has said before, in the absence of Oliver in particular, it just gives us an option that we wouldn't otherwise have. Yeah.
And I reckon one of the real positives of Oliver being out is, there's three. There's one big positive is our numbers have not dropped off at all since he's in out. Like, we've been really impressive. It's been our one area of our game that we've actually been tracking quite well in the last 4 or 5 weeks. That's one. Second one is that it provided the opportunity for JJ. I've just seen he was at 71% of centre bounce attendances. I'm not fully convinced that Gus's best position is as a mid, but I'm fully convinced JJ's best position is a pure. And he's been a victim of what you were just saying about Gus. He's never had a position of his own, and I think this gives him a real chance to spend quality time, good minutes, playing as a pure mid. And my sense is that's his best role. He looks like he's trimmed down a bit. He's moving really well. I thought he had just a fantastic game, really, really clever game. And it's like you and I have talked about a lot, George. His natural footy IQ really shines, and he's got to spend time on the ground really for that to really take advantage of that IQ. So I thought his performance was great, and that's a real positive about Oliver not being there. It allows Gus to get time in the middle, and it allows JJ to spend time in the middle in the spot I reckon he's best at.
Travi14 said almost in the chat room, almost all of Petracca's centre-bounce attendances were in the second half, which is good coaching. Move him when we need him. All right, let's get to our listener questions. Bigfoot says, forward connection and accuracy was a lot better this week. Any concerns that the victory was aided by the fact that the Saints were 3 men down from quarter time? Pew, pew, pew adds, I'd say it was a big concern, despite the Saints only having 2 on the bench for most of the match. They won the inside 50 count by 6, overall possession count by 26, contested possession by 8, and despite winning the hit-outs by 21, we broke even at the stoppages. Imagine what would have happened if those 3 Saints players didn't go down and they weren't wasteful in their possession and timid in taking the game on. I'll absolutely take the 4 points, and there were some minor improvements in our game, but we were by no means impressive considering the carnage on the Saints bench. And no matter who you're playing, if you told me that during the first quarter our opposition would be down 3 players, I guess 2 with the activation of the sub, I'd be licking my chops and expecting us to run over the top of the opposition, yet we weren't able to take advantage of this situation. George, Big Man sort of dispelled that it's not a cause of concern. Are you concerned at all by that fact that
Goody wasn't concerned in his press conference? He shut down that question pretty quickly as well. But
he wasn't happy with that question at all. He was not happy with that question.
The answer was straightforward. Yeah. Are you concerned?
Yeah.
No.
I like grumpy Goody.
Yeah.
He was very grumpy.
The reality is, that they were 3 men down. They were 3 good men down as well. These weren't fringe players. Just as equally before them, the players they didn't have playing on the ground were Membry, Battle, Higgins and Caulfield. Higgins is their top goal scorer for the year.
And Hill.
And Brad Hill, and Hunter Clark's just come back this week through the VFL as well. So they were missing a good number of players, which indicates that they're a team.
As are we.
Sorry?
As are we.
As are we. But they're a damn good team. They played some pretty good football.
They were more impressive than I thought they'd be.
Yeah, agreed. And if you took the equivalent players out of Melbourne, take away your full forward, your centre half forward, a couple of your midfielders, and while we're missing a couple of our prime movers, they were certainly missing heaps of those. So it was a good effort and a good indication of where the Saints actually sit in that. I was really impressed with them though that they were only able to manage 52 interchanges. So they were run into the ground. Just on the stats, they had 15 players in the match play over 85% game time. We only had 6. So it was a monumental effort by them. Marshall played 95% game time in the ruck. Almost unheard of sort of numbers. So they're in a good situation. We'll bank the 4 points. We're pleased to be able to do that, but don't underestimate that the Saints, even with a couple of players missing, aren't a good side.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm a little bit disappointed because I think
in what we won by 4 goals.
I know, but
what's to be disappointed? What should we won?
They should have.
If we won by 62 points, for instance.
I would have been rapt if we would have, because we should have won by 62 points. I thought, given all that, we should have run them off their feet. We're supposed to be the fittest team in the competition.
Nearly 4 goals.
And I'm happy with that. I'm not sad. I'm not crying that we won.
You're not happy. What?
No, I'm not happy that we didn't run away with it.
So what's your threshold then? What should have we won by?
Look, I don't know. But
you don't even know what score.
I'm worried. No. It's not that. It's not about that. I think had they not had those 3 players off, I think we would have lost the game. And that's what I'm not happy about.
But then I guess it goes back to my point.
Then I
about
don't
this
think
is
we're
not,
good
each
enough.
game isn't a litmus test for our chances of winning the flag, for Pete's sake.
I'm
So then-
worried we might.
so-
I'm worried if we play like this, we might not even make the finals. That's what I'm
What
not
about
worried about.
Collingwood? If you were a Pies fan, would have you been happy with a middling 6-point win against the Saints?
I'd be wrapped if I was in the Pies position. Whether they keep winning. Well, they lost 2 games this year.
Right.
I'd be
Well,
wrapped with that.
All right, well, let's give them the flag right now. Let's stop the
No,
season.
anything can happen
Let's
in
stop it.
finals.
No. Let's stop it because everyone wants to give Collingwood the flag. Let's
I'm not
just do
giving
that.
them the
We'll
flag.
We'll give
I'm
Channel 7
worried.
their ratings.
I'm
Everyone
worried
can-
that we are not as good as our position says we are.
Right. Well, what can we do about that?
I don't know. We'll see.
Right.
We'll see what happens next week.
I think it's also important, Andy, to people really, really underestimate the effects of that Alice Springs game. That playing in the wet was the same when we played against Port. We played poorly the week after. People get really tired by that sort of thing. So it's while the Saints were missing players and they were exhausted, our players were pretty well knocked around as well. We'll talk about it later. But Grundy and Gawn could not get a trot up in the game.
I mean, we were
And,
massive in that game. We were like plus 30 or whatever it was for a contested ball, and our tackling numbers were through the roof. I'm not sure if you saw any of the Giants-Hawthorn game. They were running up and down on the one spot as well against the Hawks, the Giants. So, I mean, it's like, all right, Andy, then. Okay, so you're worried about that game. You know what frustrates me is the week-to-week sort of like complete ignoring of history. Or we beat Collingwood. Have you forgotten we beat them only 3 weeks ago on Queen's birthday or King's birthday? We beat Collingwood. We dominated Collingwood. Brisbane beat Collingwood. So, like, why it doesn't hold water that worrying about this game. Go back and watch the replay of that game.
Yeah, that game frustrated me as well with one of our other deficiencies
we beat
in our
the
scoring.
raging favourites for the flag. Why doesn't that hold any water? People going, oh no, they had a down day, did they? Or
No. I read they had a few.
Does the FNMFCFS stand for frustrated? Not
it should. All right, let's get on.
Look, I apologise on the players' behalf, on the coaching staff, on the conditioning team's behalf that we didn't win by 17 goals, Andy.
It wasn't the 17 goals to win by. It was my fear that if they had their full team in, not the players injured before the game, but the players that we might not have won that game. And that leads me to believe that maybe I know, but that leads me to believe that we're not as good.
But look,
and
surely
that's
you've
next.
watched Goody the way he coaches long enough to know that he plays the team in front of him. You don't think there's a chance that if they were up and running that we would have played differently, for instance? We controlled the tempo in that last quarter. As I said, we went out and we only played on 5% of times after marks. Maybe we would have played differently. Personally, I think May would have given King a bath anyway. I don't think he hurt going off. The other two did because they didn't have the rotations. And it freed up May, obviously, to have his best game of the season. So that was handy as well. So, but, you know, we would have adjusted and did what we needed to do to win the game.
Still on contested possessions and clearance counts, Red and Blue Beard asks, how concerned should we be about not being ahead in contested possession and clearances? Contested possessions used to be our one wood. Is that still the case? So, Big Man, you're a strong proponent of not worrying too much about the clearance differential, but contested possession is still an important metric. How concerned are you about losing both those counts and the inside 50s? We still won the match, maybe aided by this Saints injury count, and maybe they were wasteful in front of goal as well.
Yeah, they were. That's the irony.
Should we be concerned about any of that?
Well, I'm really, really worried about the Saints' forward connection issues. I mean, that's and their efficiency. That really concerns me. No, we shouldn't be worried about it. They only beat us by a couple. They're the best contest team in the AFL. They're number one. For contested ball differential in the AFL, and I think we're number 2, and they only just beat us. And I reckon
it was 8,
there's maybe 4 games this season, maybe 3, where we've been beaten in contested possessions. We've beaten, I think, when we played Brisbane. I've got a feeling Essendon might have beaten us for contested ball, and maybe Port, but I reckon we've won apart from this game, every other game contested possession. So not a concern at all.
especially with a guy named Oliver not in the side and
It's
a
a
guy
big,
named Petracca not playing all that much in the middle.
yeah, that definitely contributed. We've got a question about time in forward half that came in late. Red and Blue Rising says, because we lost time in forward half this week, we seem to have more space when we did go forward and easier avenues to goal. Is there a flaw in our game plan that when we win time in forward half, it's too congested to score? So, Bin Man, any thoughts on this question from Red and Blue Rising regarding less congestion in our forward line, perhaps due to having less time in forward half? And I imagine there's less congestion when we win the ball from a turnover because we're able to move the ball quickly into our forward line. But if the ball's in our forward line all the time, does that mean it's more congested and harder for us to score?
Well, so it was I'm really pleased with that question. That question was asked because I was thinking exactly the same thing as I was driving home. It's a really curious sort of phenomenon, really. We are 100% a forward half team. Everyone's a forward half team now. So that's the model now. So, the way Geelong played in 2021, forget that. They chip it around, hold it. It's sort of what Saints were doing that you were saying, George. That's dead in the water as a way of playing footy. Well, it's just not a winning way of playing footy. So, that getting it forward and then trapping in the forward half, teams do it to a greater or lesser extent. But the Saints and the Demons are all about getting it in the forward half. You would have heard Goody and Lyon both reference that notion in their post-match presses. So the problem with it is that it's all about re-entries. You trap it in your forward half, it comes back out. We set up the wall and then we kick it, we re-entry. But when we do, it goes into a crowded, chaotic forward line where there's often 30 players in there because there's been it hasn't transitioned and everyone's run down the ground. So it's a really interesting question around what that means for the game. Is we're not going to move away from it, but we saw a glimpse of what happens when you get once we start moving the ball more quickly, our avenues to goals will sort themselves out because the ball's transitioning quickly off the halfback flank and you don't allow the opposition time to get their defence set. So we saw a glimpse of what that will look like against the Saints because we're not at our running best yet. But a huge factor in our accuracy in the first quarter and the Saints' inaccuracy was the fact that the Saints dominated time in forward half, meaning that they had multiple re-entries, as I said, the Saints did into a crowded, chaotic forward zone, whereas we got our goals on the counter, in soccer. So we were entering a forward line with one-on-ones, heaps of space, leading lanes, and the opportunities we got, at least, 2 goals in that first quarter from the goal square, 1 nibblers. Joe the Goose style. So it was exact mirror of the GWS game where they got their goals on the counter and it looked like, well, how come they're getting space in their forward line? How are they able to engineer the space? That's because they are getting all of their goals on the counter. So as to the question of whether we should adjust that, game plan, that's a downside of it. That means that you're kicking when you're getting re-entries, you're going back inside a super crowded forward lines. That means marks are basically impossible, almost impossible. Even in good conditions, it's really difficult to get a mark. There's no leading lanes. The ball's going to hit the deck. It's chaotic and it's messy. But we're not going to move away from that. And what Lyon would say to that question, I imagine, is that they'd kick straight. They would have made that game very hard for us to win because they really should have been 3-4 goals up at the end of the first quarter. Exactly the same against GWS the previous week. We trapped it in our forward line. We got our looks, but we didn't take our chances. If we'd kicked straight last week with the forward half game, we would have put that game well out of GWS's reach. But it definitely is one of the disadvantages of that model. It makes it harder to score because the score, the shots are not only from crowded conditions, almost invariably under pressure because they've got no space. So, there's 30 players in a 50-metre arc. It stands to reason that it's going to be harder to kick a goal because you're always going to be under pressure, and that's what happened to the Saints. So Collingwood moved the ball so quick. They still want to get it forward, but they don't trap it in the way. They don't have such an emphasis on trapping it in their forward half the way the Saints do and the D's do, which means that often their goals, like you could see in that third quarter in the game on the weekend, they're moving it into a forward line that's open. There's leading lanes, there's free players, they run in waves so players get ahead of the ball. We'll get that back too once we start moving the ball quicker. We'll engineer that, but that is one of the downsides of trapping it in the forward half. And I think in the last few weeks, it's really important. Goody made this point a couple of times now, how wet it was in the Cats game and the GWS game. So not only is, obviously not in the Saints game, but not only is that forward half game chaotic and there's 30-odd players in a small area, when it's wet, it's even, everything's harder. So it definitely is one of the downsides of that model, but there's no way that we're moving away from it. Everyone's moving towards that model. Cats copied it last year. Not quite at Richmond, definitely. Not quite as much as us in terms of trying to trap it in and that pressure we apply up forward. But yeah, it's definitely Lions' model and it's definitely Goody's model.
Well, we have a voicemail from our previous anonymous voicemailer, who I believe B-Man knew then dubbed Salty, based on his last call right after the Cats game, where he said that perhaps he shouldn't have called in Salty the day after a loss, hence the moniker Salty. He's asked about fatigue, and B-Man, since you're our guru on all things fatigue related, have a listen to what Salty has to say and give us your take after that.
Hey boys, it's Salty here. I'm running with the name.
I like it.
I'll give you a call about the game on the weekend and just the thoughts of it. Certainly looked really, really tight out there. If anything, at the end of the game, it almost looked as though we were the team without the three guys missing. Just wondering your thoughts on that, and if it's a cumulative fatigue of the GWS game and the travel, whether we'll be bouncing back playing at the G this weekend.
So that's it from him. He's got something else he'll say later on, but that's it from his fatigue.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to fatigue listeners with a conversation about fatigue, but I mean, yes, there's no question that as we just talked about, 6-day break is a bit like, I've talked about this before. I've tracked this for a long time because for betting reasons. It has a massive impact, 6-day break. Fortunately, they were coming off a 6-day break, as I said too. But that, as George said, that game up in the Alice it must have been an incredibly exhausting game. So there's that fatigue. There is the accumulative fatigue for the full season. And then there's the additional block of training that they're doing now, the heavier block of training designed to maximise the likelihood we're cherry ripe come finals. And that's what I think they're coming to the end of that now. I want to shout out to George, actually. We talked about this a few weeks when, we'll really start coming good. And he said round 19, and I reckon he's spot on, actually. And that marries up with what Selwyn Griffith said on the podcast earlier in the year. The form fatigue is, you can hear it. The commentators are starting to talk about it more. And ex-players are starting to talk about it more. Lepage explained the drop-off of the Pies in that last quarter by talking about fatigue. So the form of the team suffers as a result of fatigue, but so does the individual players, particularly younger players being impacted more than others, and individual players being impacted more than others. So there's a pattern, isn't there? This is the third season in a row. So even regardless of whether you're on board with this heavy block of training and loading and all of the, regardless of that, this is the third season in a row where we've had a significant mid-season slump characterised by losses in games when we've been favourite, a noticeable drop-off in our skills, a noticeable or almost chronic inaccuracy. So whatever someone's explanation is for that pattern, surely one can't be that it's just a weird coincidence that at exactly the same time in the year, 3 years in a row for a block of about, basically 2 months, we drop away. And as I've said, from my perspective, it exacerbates our skill issue that, we've got a lot of players who aren't that skilled. For me, it has one of the really interesting things is that this year, it's informed selection philosophy much more this year than in previous years. Didn't at all, arguably, last year. And Demonland last year, and we were talking about it on the podcast, were crying out for Goody to be less static in his selection and less sort of stubborn and the same team coming in week. Why not copy Geelong's use of a squad mentality. We've got these players that Casey playing, and George made the point, well, none of them are playing at an AFL level standard. Well, this year Goody's done that and he's still getting criticised. So he has taken a good squad mentality. And as an example, there's no question in my mind, zero question, that JVR is in the finals, best 22 side, no question. For me, it makes perfect sense to rest him now. Like, he's a 19-year-old kid in his second season of footy. This is what people were screaming out to last year and criticising Goody for not doing, for not resting players, for not managing players, for not bringing players in from Casey. So he does it this year, brings in Wowie, and everyone's on board the Wowie train, but, drops JVR, and everyone has a hissy fit. So that fatigue is definitely a factor. I think we're coming out the other end of it. I think one more week, I think we'll be cherry ripe. I'm on board with what George was saying. The following week against the Crows, I think we'll be really hitting our straps, and definitely a factor in this game, 100%.
Lefty asks, can we take a moment out of the podcast to appreciate Stephen May? And absolutely, we can take more than just a moment to praise the efforts of Demonland-sponsored player Stephen May. It was simply immense in this match right from the get-go. He was marking everything inside, 13 intercept possessions, 8 intercept marks from the 12 marks that he took, 5 spoils, 29 disposals, a game-high 459 metres games. And yes, he took out 2 tall forwards legally and unintentionally. Max King ran into his brick wall, and May's knee took out Cordy in that exceptional mark, and that certainly freed the whole back line up. But George, it was still a masterclass in defence from our All-Australian fullback.
It certainly was. Certainly having King off the ground at a very early stage in the game really freed up the space available for him. The Saints simply for a start off, didn't have another tall to go down there. So it's not surprising that Stephen May had an absolute party, because we had people like Lever and Petty and Rivers able to work around, and they were probably as tall as any of the other St Kilda forwards. He actually managed to get rid of all 3 of those St Kilda players. I think it was Ross was trying to chase him when he did the hammy. So,
that's right.
Yeah, so he's removed 3 of the opposition in one game. Any coach should be happy with that. Perhaps not the way it was done, but he certainly did that. The really staggering stat for me was, because he was so relatively free, the 459 metres gained for the game, because he's such a great long kick. That was 100 metres more than anybody else. Normally you expect the Langdons and the Hunters to be amassing the metres, but Stephen May was 100 metres more, 25% more than anybody else on the field. It was a fantastic number, and he was on 94% time on ground. So he was there the whole time. Great game, 3 contested marks, even 4 score involvements, which is amazing for someone who's basically playing at the other end of the ground. 13 intercept possessions. I think it was 8 or 9 intercept marks. Yeah, it was just a delight to watch. So Stephen May back at his best. That'll be good to see, especially next week against the couple of Brisbane forwards.
He played fantastic, didn't he? And his marking was brilliant. His hands were super sticky, and he looks like it's, we talked about this all season. He's been struggling with those ground ball gets and getting down, but he seems to getting each week incrementally that action looks freer, and he was awesome. It's still frustrating. His kicking still frustrates me to death. I mean, he kicked this. There's a lot of talk about Collingwood at the moment. Everyone loves them, but at the end of the day, the part of the trick for a team, for a coach, is the chances of winning the flag. You got to build your game plan around the players you've got. Goody inherited the foundation for our flag was Max Gawn, Petracca, Oliver, Gus, Salo, and Viney. That's who we got. That was the foundation that were already at the club when Goody came on board. Then to add the pieces of the puzzle for a premiership team to take us to the next level, he brought in Lever and he brought in Steve May. So that's the backbone of our premiership team. All 7 players, with barring Salo, are average kicks. So you can't do anything about that. That's the foundation. They're our best players. Our top 7 best players are all average kicks. And so you build a game plan around their contest ability and your defensive system, their discipline, their ability to play roles. Whereas you compare them to Collingwood, they've got 5 or 6 really elite kicks. Their best players are elite kicks. Pendlebury, Sidebottom, and Nick Dacos. Their 3 best players are elite kicks. Our 3 best players are average to poor kicks. And as an example, May, under no pressure, kicks the ball on the full in Marvel. That is just, that it's just not that. It's indicative of how poor our kicking is, I think. But I don't want to take away the shine off Steve May's game, but that just frustrates me so much when he misses those kicks.
Buck Necked says, interested in your thoughts on the style change this week. It looked like we started with manic running and handball. Saints broke this down and we began to shift tempo, more kicks and control. Is this part of us practicing for finals? Cheers, gents. Looking forward to the potty as usual. Spirit of Norm Smith adds, are we a defensive team that is scared of using the corridor? We looked good in the 4 to 5 goals with passages through the middle, but mostly this running play was hardly seen as we went slow and kicked to contest after contest. Our scoring gets restricted and ultimately keeps our scoring ability low. Question, is it our skills or lack thereof or outright defensive mindset that means we are scared to play the corridor more just in case of turnovers? Now, I'm not sure the change was due to anything that we initiated directly. I think it was reactionary to the negative way the Saints were playing. So, Big Man, thoughts on the game style and what those guys have said?
Well, again, without frustrating everyone, it's hard for me to untangle the fatigue from say, that question. Regardless of what you think of the cause, if you accept that we were clearly fatigued in this game, as indicated by the fact that our pressure fell away to 158, then we want to win the game. Right, so taking it on through the corridor and making that game into a fast tempo game, which everyone loves to watch, we would have lost that game of footy because we weren't covering the ground well enough. I keep saying this, is that you can't, you could see against Collingwood, they fell away in the last quarter when their running fell away, when their inability to cover the ground fell away. The Dogs got right back into that game. Now, if we had just gone out and tried to get into a running match with the Saints, they would have beaten us. So, it's none of those things in terms of our too defensive or not have the skills. It's that what I've been talking about. There's 3 phases of the season. If you want to know what we're going to play in the 3rd phase of the season, which is from pretty much, now next week into the end of the finals, go back and watch the first third of the season. Watch the first 3 or 4 games of footy again. That's how we will try to play in the finals. We'll only be able to play that way if we're in optimal fitness and running on top of the ground. And for whatever reason we're not able to run on top of the ground and get back to that running power, well, then we're toast, absolute toast. And then what we will have to do is to play that defensive style game that we've played against Carlton, a lesser extent the Pies, and again last night in that Saints game. So, just that stat that I talked about before, we could have gone fast in that last quarter. We could have gone for a 5-goal, 6-goal, 7-goal win that would have made you super happy, Andy. But we could have cost us the game by doing so. So we only played on from the mark 5% of the time. What's that about? That's about controlling the tempo, not allowing the game to get into a running race because we didn't have enough fuel in the tank. So, that's why I think one of Collingwood's biggest vulnerabilities is teams always are in it with a chance with Collingwood. They don't put teams to bed. It's so reliant on their running power.
Kiwi D wants our thoughts on the Grundy experiment up forward. It's just not working for mine. Neither of them is contributing much up forward and seem to clog up the forward line at times. I would prefer that we play another genuine tall up forward instead and rest the ruckman on the bench or a kick behind the ball. Despite winning the hit-outs, I thought they both lowered their colours against Marshall around the ground this week. 30 disposals, 10 marks, 7 inside 50s and 7 intercepts for Marshall combined with Grundy. Grundy had 29 disposals, 9 marks, 6 inside 50s and 0 intercepts. Spirit of Norm Smith adds, Gawn and Grundy, it's not the real ace in the pack as expected. Neither are taking a contested mark inside forward 50. Grundy cannot seem to take a contested mark at all. Max seems to be shortchanged in time in ruck. Max is definitely the best ruck option for us and needs more time in my view. Question, is there a form or a problem with the structure? Monocular asks, can we really carry two rucks when neither seem to click up forward when resting? I realise that Max had a stellar 2021 September up forward, but that whole period was no doubt adrenaline-driven and success leads to success. That magic hasn't been repeated yet. Seems like JVR could do second ruck work, especially up forward, though some will no doubt feel that Shaki deserves a spot. Thoughts? Needless to say, I just love the podcast. Thanks to you all. Titus Toddy says, an alternative approach to the Gawn Grundy experiment is to rotate them week to week to ensure that Max doesn't end up banged up again this year. Max is getting old and we need to do whatever it takes to have him in at his peak in the finals. What do you think? George, I know you have strong thoughts on our use of Grundy and Gawn. We've heard your take on this in previous weeks. Has your opinion changed any this week?
No, I don't think it's changed in any great way. You do have to remember why we've been using this combination up forward is because T-Mac and Ben Brown have basically been unavailable for most of the season. And, we've had a young 19-year-old JVR playing forward line who, by any account, you couldn't expect him to play all 22 games in the forward line. We've already seen him. I'm in total agreement. I believe he's being rested by going through the motions at Casey. It has been disappointing, the numbers that are coming out. I don't think, even though we've had to play Gawn, Grundy up there because we haven't had any other tools, they haven't really contributed in the way that we might have expected. Gawn's kicked 7 goals for the season. Grundy's kicked 10. Gawn's played more games, of course. Grundy's played more games, of course. But I think it's been affecting them because they've had to spend so much time on the ground. Grundy's getting less than 1 contested mark a game. He's only had 14 for the whole season after 17 games. It's not what we really expected out of him. Max is getting 2 contested marks a game on average at the moment. I don't think that having them in the forward line has done any favours for others, particularly in this game. I noticed Ben Brown. Ben needs room to run into so he can take that jump to get up to the maximum point in his when he's trying to attack the ball if he's on a lead. The trouble was that in this game, Ben was being pushed out to basically the 50-metre line, so he gets no running chance to get to the ball, and he's not a great runner in the first place. So he was spending all his time trying to run backwards. It just seemed like a really poorly managed situation in the forward line. At one stage, we had Grundy in the ruck, Gawn playing in the forward line, Ben Brown at centre half forward, and the ball was in our forward line. We had 3 of the tallest players on the ground, all within 20 metres of each other. And guess what? The Smalls got it, and St Kilda waltzed it out of our forward line. It just doesn't look like it's right at the moment. I think we'll see it change. Like I said, we'll talk about it later about who comes in, but I've got no doubt that JVR will come back in. Ben Brown will have the 2 forwards. We won't need to put Gawn and Grundy in the forward line. We'll be able to move them out to create that wall, or we'll be able to use them more in the back line as that sort of defensive, as part of the defensive structure, which we've seen used so brilliantly in the past. But the problem is we haven't had other options up to this stage. Ben's hopefully going to last the rest of this distance. I think he's added a lot to the forward line this week, but I think we need to use the others better. Unfortunately, I think Grundy might be actually rested this week. He looked absolutely, to me, completely cooked. He couldn't get a trot up, couldn't mark the ball, moved it around
a lot too, I thought.
Yeah, exactly, because he's and remember that also that he's played every game during the season, and his pre-season this year was the first one for over 12 months.
It's a huge effort.
So it's a great effort to be on the ground, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if Grundy gets a rest this week. So we'll wait and see. But I agree with what everybody else has been saying. It just doesn't look right at the moment, but let's wait and see.
Just a couple of thoughts on that. If I'm right and we do get back to moving the ball running in waves and creating quick ball movement off the half-back flank, that will change the dynamic a bit because there'll be more opportunities to create one-outs, one-on-ones down in the forward line. That's what you're trying to do is isolate your talls one-on-one. When we're dominating forward half, it goes back to that question before. When we're dominating forward half, you're never getting one-on-ones. So it's always a mess of bodies in there that they're playing against. But the other thought I had, so I think, my sense is that it'll be more effective in the last third of the season, a bit more similar to how it was in the preseason. But interestingly, I heard Lever interviewed on ABC directly after the game, and he was asked exactly that question about, well, what's the deal with them up forward? It doesn't seem to be working, as evidenced by the fact they're not kicking goals. That was the question, essentially. And Lever, who I find just really, really interesting to listen to about footy, is really thoughtful, and I like the way he talks about the game. He said, well, they don't actually, it's not about goals. He said that in footy these days that it's so critical to ensure every team has an intercept marker. He said, well, they have May, and he made the point that, you saw what happens when an intercept marker gets off the chain. He said, our game, meaning Melbourne's game, is based around intercept marking. And then if you think about Collingwood and Moore and, Carlton and McGovern and, every team's got that player. And Lever's point is that the philosophy of the two talls up there is to, their KPI essentially is that intercept marker does not mark the football and that it gets brought to ground, even if the opposition then win the ground ball, which I thought was really interesting because, of course that's important, but what Lever was saying is it's their role. In fact, their key function, Grundy and Max, is to ensure that intercept marker doesn't get hold of the footy, which again sort of goes to, the club at AFL level, they've got different key performance indicators than, what we're often aware of, I think.
Smurf says, I thought James Jordan played one of his best games for the club. He is way too good for Casey, and I really hope he gets a good crack at it, especially whilst Clary is out. Hope they can find a spot for him later in the season. I have to agree with that assessment, Smurf. I thought JJ played a terrific game, and you're right, his talents are wasted at Casey. But I think the big issue with JJ is not his talent, but perhaps it's his versatility in other positions. We've got a full complement when we've got a full complement of mids available. There really isn't a spot for him. Sparrow's probably a nose in front of him. We've tried him on the wing, and now with both wings positions filled with genuine wingers, it only really leaves half back or half forward, and those positions are filled too, and his skill set probably doesn't lend him to playing those roles anyway. As noted in previous podcasts, he certainly makes an excellent sub, as he can substitute in a variety of roles, and contract-wise, he's yet to make the call, and if he is squeezed out of the team once Clary returns, I reckon he might decide to move on for more opportunities elsewhere, as we've noted on the podcast many times. And I, for one, would not begrudge him for that, seeking those other opportunities elsewhere. He's really just too good for VFL footy. But positions in the midfield at this club at this time are scarce. But whilst Clary is MIA, he ably fills a role in the midfield, and I thought he played a great game this week. Any thoughts on that? You mentioned that before, Big Man, that JJ had a great game.
Yeah, I'll chip in if that's all right. Yeah, I saw him because we didn't have the podcast last week at Casey. He had 41 possessions at Casey, and if you looked at the replay of the goals from that previous week, in the first 4 or 5 goals, Jordan was involved in each and every one of them. Just he was.
Say they weren't junk possessions.
No, they weren't junk. It was, and he played that way the whole game. He was fantastic. So yeah, if you ask why players aren't being played from Casey, that's the standard that they have to come to be able to get a level up, to get selected at the AFL. Now, because Oliver's not there, he has taken his opportunity with both hands. That is fantastic. It's obvious he's going to get a couple more opportunities because Oliver's not going to be back for a couple more games, it would seem. So, yeah, I think we're in a fortunate position that we're able to give JJ time in the middle where he can show his best. And without being used as a sub, where you only get limited time, limited minutes, and you usually finish up in a sub situation of being used to replace someone else around the ground at some point. So here's the opportunity for him to show his wares. If he does the same as he did in Casey a couple of weeks ago, he may well find himself in a more permanent role.
Yeah, I've always had a lot of time for him, but I just, like you, George, I love his footy IQ. He's just a smart player. He makes decisions quickly, and then, he got knocked a fair bit last season for holding onto the ball, but it's hard to know if it's the team rule. It's the team rule, and he's the sort of player not to break the team rule. And I think that's why he's been, he's sort of selected so often as a sub. But to be honest, it's not helped his career much, has it? Because he's never been able to bed down, and that he's got a bit of a. He doesn't strike me as being a natural half-forward flanker the way, Sparrow can take those overhead marks and be quite damaging as a half-forward flanker. So it means he can't be in that rotation. Pure mid is his go. He reminds me a lot, actually, of Gus in his second year, or the year he was third in the Brownlow, where he's not super quick, and he's just sort of, he cuts the edges and knows how to get the footy.
Red Jacket says, moving track forward, work this week, helped that he kicked 2 opportunistic goals and was a dead eye for the 2 set shots. But are we robbing Peter to pay Paul and losing his grunt in the midfield? Do you have any stats on his percentage of time in the midfield and forward line? I think we said 50-50. Until we can clone him, what do you guys think is our best use of tracks? So, George, you're fond of the robbing Peter to pay Paul statement when it comes to moving the magnets around the board. Where should we be playing track? I guess in particular while Fritsch is out and we're down sort of that forward, that mid-sized forward. But also we've got Clary out, so there's that need for him in the midfield.
And that's the bottom line. And for what we face, I think we were fortunate in this game against St Kilda, given the outs that they had in the midfield. I think we'd assessed that their midfield weren't as much of a challenge as what they normally would be. And so we were able in this game to use Petracca much more forward than what he normally is. He still played 50% in the middle. And I think, if I recall from Goody's presser, he was asked exactly this question, and his answer was something like, it's going to be horses for courses. So in the coming game against Brisbane, who've got a seriously good midfield, we can't afford not to have Petracca playing the majority of the time in the midfield. It's going to be simply depending on the game, who we're playing and who we've got available in the midfield. But when you're coming up against the McCluggage and Ashcrofts and Zorkos and those type of players, for Brisbane, you need someone who can at least match it, and Petracca's going to be the man. Yes, he can go forward. It was good to see him kicking goals. It was good to see him, more importantly, kicking set shots, which has been a real failing of his in the past. His strength was on display magnificently, because his other 2 goals simply came because he was just too strong for the opposition. I think we'll see track, the percentages will probably go to 75-25 perhaps this week.
Yeah, it was a good opportunity too to give him a bit of shop out, because he looked buggered the previous week with the load that he did in the GWS game. He looked exhausted. So to give him a bit of a chop out, one of the things that, because he was playing forward, and I was sitting behind the goals at the top, so when he was down our end, when he's got space, I really appreciate how good a footballer he is, just from it. Like he's such a powerful player and all of that. That's evident, but how clever he is. And he's got that ability. And I think it's sort of a basketball thing of going to the player who's going to get the ball rather than tracking the player who's got the ball. And so it seems a natural thing for him. So he's often cutting those corners or cutting it off or getting his hand into, not necessarily getting the player who gets it, but intercepting on the way through. And he seems to be always switched on and always thinking. And it was great to see him kick so well. I mean, his set shots have been pretty good this season, actually, or in the last few weeks at least. So from set shots, he seems to have simplified his action. And it was a thumping kick. I forget which one. The last goal wasn't it, late in the game? So right at the end, that was a beautiful kick.
Yeah, I was straight behind it. It was certainly was. Scroll says, can the panel please discuss the Cozzy situation? I can't help think that he is well down on form and perhaps confidence due to his lack of possessions and his scoring output. Seems to be disinterested in chasing at times. I never would have thought this was even something we'd have to consider, but does he need some time at Casey to find some form and spark? Spirit of Norm Smith adds, Cozzy, yes, it's all across the media. He kind of looked disinterested at times on Saturday night. 4 possessions, 3 tackles, chased but often wasn't going 100%. Wanganeen Malera waltzed around unmanned mostly. Must be something not quite right. We love him and need his excitement and scoring power to threaten. Monocular says, like so many others, I'm very concerned re Cozzy. He seems to have lost all confidence since his suspension in round 1. Appears to have lost passion and fire. Is there any nagging injury more than most players usually carry through the season, or something else bugging him? And as a pendant, those who refer to him as disinterested, I suspect they mean uninterested. Thanks for that in English lesson there, Monocular.
Good pedantry there, Andy. Well done.
Sorry,
Andrew.
And since it's across all the media, Bin Man has to answer this.
Well, so I am.
haven't been
One
listening
sec.
to any media for 2 weeks. I'm blissfully unaware of any criticism of Coz.
So, Bin Man, what do we do about Cozzy? He only had the 4 possessions. The 4 players had less possessions, and 3 of them were nursing injuries in the Saints medical room before quarter time. And the other one came on later in the game in a defensive role. That was Joel Smith. He did seem uninterested in chasing at times. And I was actually gobsmacked after the game to learn that he was 3rd overall for pressure acts, 2nd for the Ds. And that stat didn't seem to marry up with what I actually was witnessing on Saturday night, but I might still have been suffering heat stroke from my holiday. Now, I'm not suggesting that he be dropped, and I'm not sure that would be the best way to get more out of Cozzy, but something does need to change. I think we did need more from Cozzy, not in the pressure stats, if his pressure stats are up, but I thought some midfield minutes might get him into games, but there's obviously a reason that he's not being trusted in that position, and I'm not all sure that we can afford to play him there at the moment. But, Big Man, is there a problem? And what's the solution?
Well, I don't think there's a problem. And I mean, at the risk of sounding like everything's sheeted home to the fatigue excuse, quote unquote, is that he's a young player. What, he's in his 3rd season? I always forget, third or fourth.
Third or fourth, yeah.
It's the and so he's got the full season fatigue, and he's got this additional training block is going to impact him significantly. All of the younger players, like Spargo, was not dropped; he was managed. There's no question in my mind. I predicted he would come into the Cats game as the sub he was. That's part of the load management. He comes into this game. He's also suffered. He's a bit older than Cozzy. Chandler has been dropped this week because his output's dropped completely away. Young player. It's a tough season. Really, we had this conversation about Cozzy, exact same conversation about Cozzy 3 years ago on the podcast about, well, depends what the club are asking him to do. So there was an example a few weeks ago in the Pies game, which I meant to talk about afterwards, but it just occurred to me then with this question, is I'm not sure whether you saw it, but Montagna did this twice. He did it on first crack, and then he did it again on one of the sort of analysis, pre-game analysis of the next game, I think, of footage in the game of Cozzy against Collingwood, and he had a neat little visual trick to say, well, look, Cameron in this circumstance, he comes across the face of the goal and he picks up the goal off the pack and goes on to score. But look at Cozzy, he's sitting outside on the outside lane protecting that ball. And so lots of people would have been going, yeah, that's a good example. A small forward's whole job is to kick goals. He should be front and centre at the front of that pack, and exactly like Joey Montagna says, and picking up the ball, because look, here's this video footage of superimposed of Cameron doing it, or I think it was Bailey actually doing exactly that. But it's his discipline to stay in the role. One of the big things in that game against Collingwood was how well we controlled the corridor and absolutely shut the corridor off for the Pies. He's disciplined to stay on the corridor. He doesn't get a stat for that, and he gets pilloried on national TV to say, look, he's not front and centre like a small forward should. He's doing what the coach is telling him to do, which is to sit in the corridor and make sure that if they win it, they can't use that option and have to go back down the line, which is what we want to do. So I say that by way of, we don't know what the internal KPIs are, but I'll bet you London to a brick. One of them's pressure. And so for his pressure numbers, he's been in the top 5 for the last 3 or 4 weeks through this difficult period. So, basically, if he's getting selected, he's doing what the coaches asked him to do. So, it's sort of that whole selection thing I find a little confusing, because are we talking about who we think should come in or who we think will come in? My view is that if we're talking about who we think will, it's if Goody's selecting him, he's clearly performing the role that Goody's asking him to perform. So, of course, we'd like to see more goals, but that pressure is what his job is. He's probably tiring like any number of players, particularly the younger players.
It's easy to forget as well. I think in the first half, Callum Wilkie had been assigned to him and gave a really hard tag on him because they realised the danger of him. And then certainly occurred after half-time because he was moved into the middle a lot more and a lot further up the field to break the tag. But just as equally, people don't notice the little touches and the little blockings and the little efforts that get no stats whatsoever that create the goals. A good example was A and B's first goal. Track got knocked the ball, but it was Cozzy gave a really deft little tap on to make sure that it went to the right person at the time. Again, you don't get stats for that sort of stuff, but he's everybody would love to see goals. Everybody would love to see marks by the tall forwards happening, but you can't expect it every week, and these sort of things don't happen all the time.
Well, I mean, as an example of why pressure is important, so when I read the thing, one of them's corralling and one of them is pressure. So again, when you're sitting up above it, there was a goal that we scored on turnover. And the reason we did is that they had it free. It was going down if you were watching on television, it was going to the right. But he sprinted, he flat out just sprinted to put a tiny bit of pressure. Almost didn't touch him, but he just got there on the kick that was exiting their D50, our forward 50, and it skanked the kick, and we turned it over and scored. Now we get a goal on turnover. We only scored 3 or 4 points more on turnover. That's one of them. He didn't kick a goal in that circumstance, but the goal we wouldn't have scored that goal if it wasn't for Cozzy's pressure. And that's why you can't dismiss the pressure stat as you've got to do more in footy than pressure. He'll come good. He'll come good, and he'll kick his goals and he'll take his marks. And
Royal Demon wants our thoughts on our selection for the Saints game and opting to go small up forward. I would ideally love to have both Ben Brown and JVR in the forward line working together. Melksham played his role and perhaps he can somewhat fill the Fritsch role in the next few weeks. Neither Brown nor Melk laid a tackle, though that's to be expected. Still not convinced our rucks offer us anything resting up forward. What is our best forward setup in to the run home? Spirit of Norm Smith adds forward. Effectiveness is still a work in progress. No Fritsch for at least the remainder of the home away season. Big Benny Brown, he looked shot in the second half. Couldn't run in the last quarter. He will have to be managed on a weekly basis. Melksham okay, but defensively was poor. Cozzy's out of form. Spargo offers little in scoring. Nibbler averages only 0.7 goals a game. Do we play Track forward to compensate and use him 50-50 mid-forward rotation? Now, Salty, our voicemailer from early on in the show, has something else to add about our forward line, so here's Salty.
Also, what do you think about the smalls? Obviously, Cozzy hasn't been playing overly well in the last few games. I'm sure Bin Man might disagree with that, but
he did.
Spargo not too bad, but what our best mix of players up there is. Ben Brown, as much as he's a great lead up, hit the ball player and takes it at his highest point, which is evident with his goal he kicked, but he really isn't the guy that you can just dump it on his head down the line. So I feel like we may need to play someone else who might be able to fill that role. It just doesn't seem like Gawn and Grundy seem to be able to cover the ground well enough to play that role. So whether that's Melksham or, I know Melksham's playing, but whether you play another JVR or Smith, just wondering what your thoughts are on what our forward lineup will be in the coming weeks. Thanks, boys.
So, George, it seems like we have a conversation about our forward line every week. We don't have these conversations about our defence or our midfield. Well, perhaps we do with our midfield when it comes to clearance chat. And whilst there were question marks about the forward line in the pre-season, our score lines in the first part of the year, perhaps against weaker oppositions, put those discussions on hold. However, cracks are starting to appear and questions are being asked once again about whether we can kick winning scores. George, can you solve our conundrums up forward?
No, because I think the conundrum's been there all season. We talked about this earlier on in the podcast, because we haven't had T-Mac and Ben Brown available, and because JVR's only 19 years of age, we haven't had the best options available for us. I think what we'll see very soon is JVR will become at least to the end of the season, a more permanent fixture in the forward line. He's mobile, he's strong, he'll attack the ball. That means that if you've got Ben Brown and JVR in the forward line, suddenly you don't need the Max Gawn sitting down there, or the Brodie Grundy sitting down there. Losing Fritsch, I think, has been critical to us. I don't know what the answer is there. I don't think Melcham is the answer by any stretch. We got a typical Melcham game out of him. This time he kicked 2 goals and
2 good goals.
I'll take those goals.
Kicks. Yeah, but where were they? From sitting out the back waiting for the kick.
Oh, that's a bit tough. Like one of them was the lead.
If that's what he has to do, then
we counted him twice actually getting outside the 50-metre line.
Yeah.
He just doesn't work. He might get more games, but he just doesn't work hard enough to be a serious threat for the long term. So, we haven't had the people available. We hope to get them in the coming weeks. Even T-Mac might be available in the coming weeks. So we just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I reckon the best way to think about that question is leaving aside who's fit, leaving aside, let's assume 100% fitness, and we've got every single player to pick from. Preliminary final day, for me, the best forward line is Fritsch, Brown and JVR, and then you work back from there. And obviously Smalls, I think Salty's exactly right on the knock on Brown. But again, it's somewhat dependent. For him to play his best footy, we have to be creating space in our forward line. The only way really we can do that is fast transition ball movement off the halfback flank or counter attack against a team like St Kilda, where we can engineer it. You saw what he can do when he can, he isn't ever going to be a pack marker. He's not strong enough in the contest. Salty's right on that. But if he can get one-on-ones and one-outs, he's a super dangerous player, like that beautiful pass Nibbler laced out to him. That's what we're going to see come finals when we're moving the ball quicker. Just on the small forwards, it would be much easier for everyone to think as of Nibbler and Spargo, not as forwards. They're higher forwards. It's a specialist role. Goals are 100% not their KPIs. So, it's a bit of a furphy that affects people's assessment of those two players in particular, and what their role in the team is. So, but for me, the best forward line is definitely Brown, definitely JVR. I think that they'll continue. From what Lever was saying, there's no thought about stopping Grundy and Max pushing forward. How that looks, they might, move that around a little bit, and may not be as often as it has been, for instance. But that seems to be what they're thinking about. Again, I just go back to the beginning of the season. What we saw at the beginning of the season is what we'll see at the end of the season. So in terms of, assuming if there's fit, hopefully T-Mac will be fit, but you can't see him. It'd be a big ask, wouldn't it, for him to come back and push his way into the seniors again. Poor bugger. I mean, he must be having Groundhog Day, because that was exactly the same problem last year, rushing back, and it ended up costing him this year because he played the VFL grand final and his plate was a plate in his foot that was a problem, and hopefully the plate in Fritter's foot, because as I said a few weeks ago, I'm guilty as anyone of underrating how important Fritter is. He's so critical. So let's hope that his rehab and it all goes well when he's back in that forward line pronto.
I was a bit. Couldn't believe that we didn't play another tall forward this week, and then a few times during the game we actually kicked to Spargo to a contest, and he's the smallest guy on the ground, and it would have been great to have a JVR or even Smith.
But again, I go back though, Andy, I think it's, well, at least the way I look at it is that the selection is all part of the puzzle for. Think of the finals, not now. So this is all about the preparation for the finals. If we, exactly like I said about the Geelong game, if we 100% had to win this game, that was a must-win game against the Saints. I have no doubt JVR would have played. But they're selecting him in the VFL with clear messages to the public, not just to internal, to he's got things to work on, to give him a chop out at VFL level. So I'm not 100% convinced he'll come back this week. I reckon he'll be 100% back for the Crows game, but he might play this week, but only if his development's ready. The selection at the moment is part of is about how it's going to help us come finals, not at how it's going to this individual match.
Mandy Lorian says, thank God you guys are back. I needed therapy last week after last week's devastating loss in Alice Springs, and I had no podcast to provide me solace. Appreciate the mini pod you provided, though. Thanks, Andy and Bim Man. My question, what did you guys think of Wowie Jr.'s game? I thought he did a few nice things with his 12 possessions, which incidentally was the same amount as Nibbler and one more than Ben Brown and Spargo, 2 more than Melksham and 8 more possessions than Cozzy. I was willing that goal home as much as anybody. I really hope they don't just dump him after one match, as we often do. Oh My D's adds, love the panel's thoughts on Taj Woden's debut. Taj had several goal assists and score involvements and one near miss off his own boot that looked great off the boot. His hand and foot skills reminded me of the poise of McVie. Personally, I'd love to see him get another game against the Lions. And yeah, I really hope we don't just discard him after one match. It's not great for a young player's confidence when you do that. They need some continuity, but I appreciate that we're playing a top 4 clash this week. B-Man, your thoughts on Taj's game? Do you think he'll keep his spot this week?
Yeah, I do actually. I think that, I'm trying to think. I don't think Goody has got a record of only giving one players a week. There's been a couple of it.
Maybe Laurie.
Disco Turner had his jaw broken, but there haven't been many. I'm trying to think. I don't think there's been very Laurie for sure. And there was
we haven't blooded many in the last 2 years.
Yeah, so I suspect he will. I thought he was solid. I thought he was. I'd be interested in George's perspective actually, because he's watched him at Casey a lot more than I have. But yeah, I thought he was solid without blowing me away. But a fantastic debut.
He was. Again, his work at Casey has been improving progressively and steadily. And previous game at Casey, I think he kicked 3 goals, started to show that poise which was necessary, reading the play a lot better. I thought his first half, he was a typical first game player. He was a little bit all at sea. He didn't quite know where to go. And even after the match in his interview, he said, he was surprised by the speed of the game. Not surprising, but I think there were 2 things happened. Either he cottoned on to what he had to do to operate at AFL level in that second half, and the other thing I thought Goody might have done was actually put him on Sinclair and basically said, follow that bloke around. He's going to tell you where the ball is, and all of a sudden he started. Woden started to get a lot more confidence. He started to be free, available as an outlet, and in the second half in particular, he got some really good score involvements, and his kicking's good. It's good quality kicking. I don't know if it's elite yet, what you call elite, but it's good quality, consistent, reliable type of kicking, which is what you want in that sort of player. So I've got no doubt. Goody doesn't have a habit of dropping people after one game. He did more than enough, I think, to keep his spot in the side this week, and again built his confidence and all that sort of thing. And at the end of the season, we might have another player that we brought through successfully. Yeah,
it was. He puts a lot of emphasis, Goody, on solid citizens and culture. And Andy, I was thinking of your interview with Judd earlier this season, but that's now the 3rd player who was. So from memory, from that interview, it was Judd McVie, JVR, Wowie, and maybe Jed Adams were all did that extra work over the Christmas under the tutelage of Judd's grandfather, I think, from recollection. But I heard on the radio one of them were talking about that was also Wowie Senior was involved in that apparently, and particularly around sprinting. So it was fantastic for me. I always loved Woe Woden, and that year he won the Brownlow was such a it was such a highlight for the D's that year. And I was thinking about it that in many ways, Wowie Senior was would now fit into footy just so seamlessly. He was like ahead of his time. His run and carry, his incredible fitness, his sort of hyper focus on diet and all of that stuff. He would play AFL footy now. That style of run and carry, say, that Collingwood are really playing with. So it was awesome to see his son come through. And like you, George, one of the things that I really love to see is players improving. And to be honest, I didn't think he was going to. I was doubtful he was going to make it into our best 22 at least, and that he might be a player that we might end up losing. But I love the fact he's taking his game to another level, and that he's, particularly with his kicking, for instance, his kicking was a bit iffy. I don't think it's elite, but it's solid enough. It's fine. He doesn't turn the ball over. So real credit where it's due for him. And I thought it was really great for Goody to take that opportunity to play him. And, I think this is a good period of time. And again, Goody was criticised a lot last season by D's fans and the media for not rolling more players through. We talked about it a lot on the podcast. He doesn't seem to be getting any credit for the fact that he's doing exactly what people were criticising him for last year. He's doing this year, and no one's giving him much credit. But I think Goody would have to win 2-3 more flags and still people wouldn't give him credit.
Spirit of Norm Smith posted some talking points, and I've added his 2 cents already amongst some of the other questions we've received. But one of his talking points mentioned was just a few one-liners about individual players who we've already talked about, but one in particular was about Salem's 150th. And I thought Salem was excellent on Saturday night, probably some of his best footy since 2021. That chase down tackle on, I think it was Caminetti. It was sensational, not just for the tackle, but for the second effort as he was involved in a play just prior to that. And he was like a ninja, the silent assassin. He didn't hear him coming. These silky skills were excellent. We really miss him when he's not in the team or playing at his best like he did this week, and they was back to that. So, that was great to see.
That arguably... That was almost a match winner because we'd turned it over just prior to that, didn't we? We got dropping the ball just prior to that, and if they'd scored on that, I think that would have been a massive swing. The thing that stands out for me now about Salem is how tough he is. I mean, he is some serious tough.
It was right near me. He gave someone, and it was probably a free kick to them. I think it was in the back. They didn't get the free.
No, they didn't get the free. That probably should have been free.
And then 2 seconds later, he gave it to someone again. And I don't recall seeing that from Salem. There was a bit of aggression there.
Yeah,
which
you're
is something
not
I
complaining about
don't
the umpires
associate.
this week, Andy, I note.
Well, you know what? St Kilda was all supporters online were all complaining about the umpiring, but they had 4 more free kicks. And
I was just surprised, actually, that they had more free kicks. But I thought they actually did a pretty good job, I have to say. I thought the umpiring was all right.
There was one time where we threw the ball and the umpires were on the other side of it, and I was on the side where it was throwing the ball, and I just love that.
That's a good excuse for the umpires that they currently got. The umpire was blindsided. There's 4 of them on the ground, for crying out loud.
I don't know why they don't position the 2 in the middle. Why they don't position sort of one? They sort of stay in the same line, but one should be sort of further, on either side.
Andy,
of
we'll
square.
go to 3 or 4 hours if we explore this sort of stuff.
All right, let's
one
move on.
question on umpire. It's not the umpire's fault. It's again my point at the last podcast about bloody the AFL deliberately not making things clear. But have I missed a memo? And they seem to have stopped paying holding the ball altogether.
Yep.
Like,
it's the same
reward
across
the bloody tackler. What's going on?
It's across all the games. They unless somebody is a blindingly obviously one like the Salem rundown, they just don't pay them.
Yeah, and even sometimes they shouldn't pay because they only pay because it's like everyone's expecting, the rundown one they seem to preference. But there were 6 or 7 free kicks that I thought it could have, to be fair, either way, for holding the ball. They just don't seem to be paying it.
No.
And they're really allowing when it's sort of in the pack, sometimes they don't quickly call the ball up. They're just waiting for it to get out, and sometimes it.
And then
the ball
surprise, players get their head bloody rammed into the ground because they haven't paid holding the ball.
Lazy asks, do we learn all that much about our chances in 2023 from this game, or does this win mean nothing if we can't get past the Lions on Friday? Now, Big Man, before you answer this one from Lazy, Tristan on Twitter pointed out this audio that I'm about to play from Nathan Buckley on SEN about the Ds and suggested that you would love this. I told him I'd play it on the podcast for you tonight and posited that you would probably vehemently disagree with Bucks. Tristan said, nice one. Can't wait for the pod as always. Thank you, Tristan. I'll play the Nathan Buckley audio from his show, Kane and Bucks Breakfast on SEN for you, Bidman. I know you've got a blackout of all media, but if you could just listen to this, we'll
Is
get your
Kane and
thoughts.
Bucks, is it shortened to Cucks?
Yes, it is. But don't get too down on Kane Corns because he actually was sticking up for the Ds, and I don't know if I like that because I reckon he's usually wrong sometimes. So just have a listen to what Bucks has to say.
I have real concerns about them.
Concerns?
They
Hang on.
They beat a St Kilda side who had their three players out really quickly. They had 19 scoring shots for a whole game, 46 entries against a crippled side. And there's the same things that are popping up, but Simon Goodwin had something to say about their efficiency up forward. So the expected score actually had St Kilda winning. But Melbourne are now 10 wins. I think they play their next 2 games. Who have they got this week? They play Brisbane at the MCG. Now Brisbane can't win at the MCG apparently. They can't win at the MCG apparently. But I think Brisbane should be favourites going into this game.
Okay. Then they play Adelaide.
And then
at
they
the
play
MCG.
Adelaide, and Adelaide can't win at the MCG.
They can't.
I reckon in 2 weeks' time. In 2 weeks' time, we'll sit here and Melbourne won't just be fighting for their position in the top 4. They'll have to be winning games to finish in the top 8.
And then they play Richmond at the MCG. They can win.
They are coming
at the
up.
MCG.
They will be coming up against teams that will be fighting to win games to play in finals. So they won't. There's no easy games
I'm a
coming
bit
for
disappointed at the level of disrespect towards Melbourne from everyone this year.
So here we go.
Hang
They
on.
haven't kicked over 80 points in 7 weeks.
I understand that, but they just knocked off Collingwood a month ago. I was going, well, let's just move past that
Collingwood's
one.
Collingwood's allowed to have a bad one every now and then.
And Melbourne
too.
are allowed to have a good one. They go to Geelong and they lose in the last quarter in tough conditions. They have 73 entries last week. And
5 goals.
Yeah, I understand that. In teeming rain.
They won't have
5 goals,
Oliver
15,
or
for
Fritsch
God's
in the next 6
sake.
weeks.
And that's another credit to them for their performance on the weekend.
And I don't.
There is a level of disrespect about Melbourne that I'm seeing filter through the AFL media and the football world, and you may be right.
I don't think
they
that
can win it this year.
I haven't been there. They can win it this year.
They can win the premiership this year.
Unlike you to be so positive.
Someone has to win it. We can't put a line through every team. How many good teams are there? What, 2 good teams? 3 good teams.
I reckon there's 3 good teams.
So only 3 teams can win the premiership right now as it sits.
I don't think Melbourne can win it.
So there's only 3 teams that can win the premiership.
Collingwood, Port Adelaide, and Brisbane.
They're the only ones.
And I still think the Cats have got the potential of
From outside
coming
the top
along.
4.
I still think 4 spots up for grabs.
Okay. All right. These fans, there's a
Bit
level
of
of
raw nerve here.
disrespect. 1300 736 736.
Well, kick over 80 points in a game, and then you'll be far more competitive, and
All
it's
right.
going to be difficult.
Good discussion.
Tristan from Twitter, if you could see Big Man's face during that clip, it would be worth its weight in gold. Big Man, you want to respond to
Christ's
Bucks?
sake, there goes my equanimity.
I want to
stayed
hear.
away from bloody peanuts like that for 2 weeks, 2 full weeks. That's the first media I've heard, and that's what you play. I mean, good Lord, what a tool.
I want to hear Bin Man back up Kane Corns. Let's go.
Yeah.
What a tool. The efficiency thing was driving me nuts. I had a mate call me up and say, what's the problem with Melbourne's efficiency going forward? I said, what the hell are you talking about? It's accuracy. 40% our inside 50 was this week. It was 39%. It was 36% last week. We're only marginally better with efficiency, yet we won the game by 21 points. The team we beat were only 40%. Have they got an issue? I mean, for God's sake, it's ridiculous. So the media, football media, is a joke. And so is anyone going to call David King? Anyone in the media going to point out the fact that David King just 3 weeks ago, when Freo beat Melbourne, or 5 weeks ago, had them in our position in fourth, said they were going to finish fourth. They're going to lucky to finish in the top 15, Freo. Is anyone going to point that out? Buckley's a senior coach. He's clueless. It drives me nuts. It's just ridiculous. I mean, look, if I was framing a market that question before, I would still probably have us equal favourite. As I maintain, Collingwood are way overrated. Probably I'd maybe have them favourite. But it's a total joke to disregard Melbourne at this stage. Disregarding our list, it's disregarding history, it's disregarding the fact that Collingwood are allowed to have a bad game, are they? Right, okay. Well, how do you explain the fact they got beaten by Brisbane? Are they allowed to have 2 games, bad games against the other contenders? It's a complete and utter joke.
Jabroni in the chat room says, I wish I could buy some of Big Man's optimism.
Not optimism, it's realism, for God's sake. It's absolute realism. If you listen to the media, we're $7 to win the flag, for God's sake. We're $7 to win the flag. And here's a tip. Do not back Collingwood at $3. It is ridiculous. $3 is like backing a Melbourne Cup winners 3 months out from the Cup. You don't back on futures. Anything could go wrong. $3, that means that they play that game, their season 100 times. They still lose 60 times. It's unbelievable. To get on Melbourne now, take the $8 and have your trip to Fiji paid for. You ruined my last fortnight.
Thank you, Tristan, from Twitter, for bringing that to my attention. All right, let's move on to Casey. One more thing
is we don't play in a bloody bubble. The scores AFL wide are going down at this time of year. Have a look at Collingwood's score, for God's sake. They played West Coast and they played North Melbourne in this period of time. So across the AFL, the scores go down at this time of year. It's not only Melbourne.
We were hoping Brisbane would beat West Coast by 191 points to wipe out a piece of our sad history.
Pies beat North Melbourne by 35 points. They're a scoring machine. They're an incredible scoring machine. My God, what the hell are people on in bloody media land?
Well, Tristan, you've just raised B-Man's blood pressure levels.
And so what happens this week if we win? What happens? It's all a joke. It's all a joke. Bucks and Corns have it a joke. Oh, you got that wrong. And then we come out and we'll smash Crows. You watch. We'll smash the Crows.
All right.
I'm confident we'll win this week, but I'm super confident we'll smash the Crows. And then what? People were going, oh, maybe we underestimated them.
No,
well,
they'll
you
say
only get one
say
go
that,
at it. So bugger off Buckley, bugger off David King. Corns,
they'll
you can stay.
They'll say Brisbane can't play at the G.
Blah, blah, blah,
Adelaide can't play
Everyone's
at the
got
G.
a caveat except when it's Melbourne. Everyone's got an asterisk except when Melbourne. We don't get an asterisk, apparently.
You've got reverse MFCSS. Casey notched up there. Are you done? Casey notched up there. Casey notched up their third win on the trot when they defeated Sandringham on Sunday, which saw them reclaim a spot in the top 4. Josh Shackey put up his hand for senior selection with 4 goals from 12 disposals and 8 marks. Jacob Van Rooyen had his moments but was beaten early and played better when further afield, finishing with just the 1 goal from 9 possessions and 4 marks. The best of the D's listed players are all closing in on veteran stage, with Adam Tomlinson picking up 27 touches and 9 marks, playing deep in defence. James Harms collected 26 disposals, had 6 clearances, 8 tackles and a goal. And whilst Luke Dunson had 22 touches and 9 tackles, Blake Howes also had 22 disposals before coming off with severe cramp. Rookie Deacon Smith was busy with 19 touches and 9 marks, and Andy Moniz Wakefield kicked 2 goals. But the day belonged to 150 gamer and Casey Premiership player Jimmy Moose Munro, who put in a typically hard performance with 9 kicks, 8 handballs and 9 tackles, a performance he would have relished, particularly as it was against his original team for who he played 22 games a decade ago. George, anything to add to that summary provided by our good mate Casey from KC?
Yeah, it was an interesting game. It was a 5-goal win in the end, and playing down at Sandringham. People who know the Sandringham ground, particularly when that used to be where our affiliates played. It's on the beach. The wind blows in one direction only, and you've got to be really, really familiar with the conditions to be able to cope with it well. I wouldn't read a great deal into this game. Lots of high possessions. Tomlinson, of course, had an absolute field day down the back line, 27 possessions. The most impressive player to me for the whole lot was actually Howes. He's the next one I think is going to be able to play. 22 disposal. He looks really confident. He's poised. He's got that same look that McVie has. He seems to find space when he wants to. And time, he's got everything right. I don't think we're going to see him play this year. You've just got to get the development into these guys. That is a big jump.
He got an injury, I think.
It looked to me like initially like a hamstring. The commentators thought it was an ankle, but Demon Dynasty, I think, reported that he was walking around after the game all right. So. The report was that it was a severe cramp. So hopefully no damage done there. The one that wasn't reported by anyone was Disco Turner. He didn't play because he apparently has broken a wrist at training during the week. So there's another one of the unknown injuries that never get reported or whatever. Let's see what comes out of it.
He's had no luck.
No, he's had no luck whatsoever. Jefferson took 2 fantastic marks in the third quarter, basically within the space of about a minute, and then did nothing for the rest of the game. He's got the talent there. It's just about getting a tank and getting the what he needs. It's 5 disposals for the whole game. But he's got the hands, and he just needs to learn what's required at this level to get through. JVR, to me, looked like he didn't do very much, but I almost felt like he was told not to do very much. He wasn't playing up the ground like he normally does. He was just outside the 50 at the most, but he wasn't attacking. Didn't do that, and I think that's the other important thing that we'll talk about when we talk about the ins and outs for next week. Is that he didn't do ruck time, so they were trying to rest him rather than
he's being managed.
Being managed, absolutely managed, and he was off at 3/4 time. He didn't play the last quarter, so with a 5 or a 6 day break to the Friday night game, if he's going to come in,
that says to me he's coming in.
Yeah,
he didn't play the last quarter.
Didn't pick that up, George. So I reckon, that would be every chance.
There was someone suggesting that he had a corky or something like that, but that's.
Well, even then you'd play him through the corky.
So I've got strongly suspect he'll be back with this week, but he certainly wasn't pressed in this game by any stretch. It wasn't easy, and there was no need to. Shaki got 4 goals because Shaki's 9 foot tall and is able to outreach most of the players at this level. The other interesting one for me was Will Verrill in only his 3rd game. Played in the ruck. Looks very, very promising. Got beaten soundly by Tom Campbell, who's a really should be playing AFL level rucking.
Was Dogs ruckman?
Yeah, used to be with the Dogs. Yeah. Big boy. He's a big boy, and for again an 18-year-old kid coming up against someone like that who's experienced, he did really well. He wasn't thrashed at all. And the other interesting thing was Casey didn't have Bell in the ruck, which would have been normally another reason to play JVR in the ruck. So Verrill basically played the ruck for the whole game. So it was a monumental effort from him. The others on the ground, Harms was his usual self. Got plenty of possessions, and then a silly freeze against and try to do fend-offs that didn't work and all that sort of thing. Chandler wasn't particularly noticeable, but yeah, I'd say Howes is the next one to keep your eyes on if you get a chance to look at the Casey games.
Yeah, he's got something about him, doesn't he? Definitely.
Yeah.
Just a couple of quick. I watched that game as well, and just three thoughts: was Jimmy Munro's 150th or 200?
Yeah, 150.
150.
What a fantastic footballer! I love him. I mean, I'd love to see whether Melbourne could do more. I don't know what you do, promote him, I guess. I don't know. But he's just a fantastic heart and soul player, isn't he? And
there was a great interview with him on the club site this week. If he's just he's a real, almost country footballer type of guy. Yeah, fantastic.
And he plays hard. God, and White's the other one too. So but just two individual moments that sort of, it was interesting what you're saying about Jefferson. So I was watching the game, but not intently. And so he took that mark you're talking about in the last quarter. Was a beautiful mark. He was out of position. There was a mark he took on the wing, which was really not a spectacular mark. It was just on one-on-one. But the way he used his body to push his opponent under the ball was just such classic sort of skill. And it's what JVR. So when you watch JVR, when I first saw him play, he's just got that natural marking instinct. And it just, in that one moment, even though it wasn't spectacular at all, I thought, well, he's a real natural player. The way he moved his player under the ball and then clean hands. And then there was another similar situation that I thought, right, okay, and it's with Shaki. He had a great game, kicked 4 goals, and that's good in anyone's language. But there was a contest down on the half forward or forward pocket where he just, I think even the commentator made note of it, where he just didn't go hard enough. And for me, Goody, he just draws a line through the players who won't go hard enough. I mean, we saw that last year. We desperately needed a tall forward, and Weed was sitting there in the reserves, but he'd had a line put through him because he wasn't hard enough.
Yeah.
And I fear that's where Shaki's at, unless he can, somehow or other find some aggression. But you
don't find that aggression.
He just doesn't have the strength at the end. It was exactly the same as Weed, and I made the point on Demon Land in one of the posts during this was his 50th game of VFL.
Yeah,
he's that level player, unfortunately for him, in terms of his career, and he's a break glass in case of true emergency. But given that we've needed a forward all this season, and he's been tried a couple of times, and he's not now, sort of tells you where he's at.
The other player I can't remember. Seston played, didn't he?
Yeah,
he didn't do much. But
he didn't do much
the other
at all.
player, I think, who's on the way up. Maybe not for a while, but he's got such neat skills, and he's got that ability to, I don't know what you call it, but like just wait half a beat before he releases the ball. Laurie as well. I thought Laurie, that was the best I'd seen him play for a while, and that ability to hold the kick before, until something, not release it unless there's something to kick to. And there's something about Seston, I reckon. I reckon he might have a bit of X factor.
The other unfortunate thing for Casey is they've got a bye this coming week. So they'll actually probably drop out of the top 4, I think, as a result of that with the other teams. But
geez, it must be frustrating for the AFL listed players who think they've got a shot to have a bye. Huh?
That's absolutely. If you're pressing for a senior selection,
like a Laurie or
but we'll wait and see.
All right. Well, training, we won't be getting any training reports from Kev Martin from Gosh's Paddock throughout the months of July and August due to the FIFA Women's World Cup. The Ds will be based at Casey Fields during that time. So unless our track watcher in the southeastern suburbs, Picket Fence, brings us one of his entertaining training reports during that time, there will unfortunately be no unfiltered training reports for the next 2 months. And that's just another reason we need our own standalone home base with a training facility. Changes. Clary is still 2 to 4 weeks away from a return due to that troublesome hamstring injury. Last week's injury report had Hibbo still doing non-contact training as a result of the kidney injury sustained in the Cats game, and it was noted that he may be available for the Brisbane game, but I doubt we will see him return this week given our cautiousness on players returning from injury and my distrust of any timeframes we are given by the club in regards to injuries. At this stage, we also haven't received an update on Petty's back or rib injury sustained during the match, so there is a possibility that we may need to replace him this week. So, George, who's coming in and who's going out this week, followed by your thoughts,
This is going to be the hard one. I think JVR will come in based on what I've just told you about what we observed at Casey. Hibbert will be an interesting one because that's going to be about 23 days since the Geelong game. So I'm not a doctor, and I don't think that either of you two are. But I don't know. We don't know what the damage to the kidneys was.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter these days, George. I mean, look at the commentary around how Oliver, how many people
That's
suddenly got a medical degree to be able to confidently say that we've botched his management.
Yeah, so, and as Andy's just suggested, we don't know where Hibbert is in terms of training, and with no Kev Martin to keep us informed would depend on picket fence. But the trouble is, we just find out about UFOs and snakes and all sorts of other things. The training is actually a secondary consideration. Grundy was the other one I thought might be rested this week. He really, really looked cooked, particularly in that last quarter. When we look at Brisbane, they used McInerney basically for the whole game. They only used Danaher as a fill-in ruck for 3 ruck contests or something like that. It wasn't very much at all. So Brisbane may well run the same sort of thing, which also means if Grundy needs to be rested, JVR coming in can fill that second role against a Danaher. You wouldn't want to put him up against a McInerney. So another possible there. Joel Smith, what do we do with him? I don't know. He came out only for a short period in this game. You don't get the opportunity as a sub to really show your wares, and we were fortunate in a way that when Petty came off, we had someone tall to sit down the back line, but I don't know that he did all that much. I know Stephen May was most unimpressed when he punched the ball forward in the goal square into the hands of the St Kilda player and went straight back over their heads. The other option is if JVR comes in, that releases Track to go back into the middle a bit more. So my biggest bet is JVR for this coming week to come back in.
And who out?
Well, you've got, Grundy maybe.
It's a bit hard to tell with Petty. Who know with the information you get in the club on injuries?
We've got zero information, and we'll find out tomorrow, I guess, with the injury
Petty
list.
looked really, when it happened, he looked really ill.
He did. Yeah,
he was struggling he wanted to stay on, but he was really struggling when it happened.
He also copped something earlier on, quite near where I was sitting as well, and then something later, so that might have been related. But he was holding his back.
And ribs apparently was what was being suggested from the media. Bin Man's best friends.
Yeah,
Big Man, any thoughts on?
Well, from what you were saying, I didn't think JVR was going to come back in, but that's a good pickup that they rested him in the last quarter. So that's a sign, isn't it, that they at least want to keep that option open. So, and he's a big game player. He wants the big crowd, and I think that this is a target game for us, and I expect that we'll be, that. I forget who the question was from, but we were looking to switch and move it and do it by hands. And it did look like, we didn't fully answer that question, but it did look like we're starting to practice those things that we want to do to start triggering in a half-back flank, which is, partly made possible by the fact that the Saints dominated territory. But I don't think we're quite cherry ripe yet. I'm agreeing with George from a few weeks back. Round 19 is probably that when we'll be at our best, but they don't have the leg speed to exploit our any lack of run we might have, and we will beat them in the contest. Interesting thing about the Lions is that we were talking about contested possessions before. I just had a quick look. We're number 1 in the AFL for contested possessions. Saints are number 2, just behind us. So that's not an issue. But what's really interesting is that the Lions are down in 11th, so past mid-table for contested possessions, averaging 138 contested possessions per match. We're averaging 145, and it speaks to the different way, between the way Melbourne play football compared to the Lions. The Lions are really, I keep thinking of them as old school, meat and potatoes football that's very still based around clearances. They're number one for clearances in the AFL. And so if you can take that away from them, obviously you go a long way to beating them. But we are all about turnovers, and that's where the contested possessions come in and the pressure. The more contest, the more physical, the more turnovers that you'll get. So two sort of slightly contrasting style, but they also like to get territory. They've improved, I think. I don't know about what you think, George. They've improved their defense a lot this year. I think his name's escaped me. Who's the Dogs player that came in? Dunkley has really, really helped them because it's meant that their balance in the midfield is better. So he's been able to play a bit outside, and really the sort of footy's changed in the last couple of years where you need your one or two bulls, but you can't have 5-6 bulls like you used to have even 4 or 5 years ago. So they've got a much better balance, I think. They're still a bit thin in the midfield, I reckon. But McCluggage is obviously a quality player. Lockie Neal's an All-Australian. Dunkley's added a heap to them. Bailey, he's good when he can get to the outside.
And Ashcroft is as good as
Ashcroft is next level. Yeah. He's
Well, you've jumped the gun a bit by talking about a match against the Lions. Let me get into my preamble that I spent a bit of time on writing today. The Lions have won 4 on the trot since their round 13 loss to the Hawks at the MCG. It was their 13th loss at the MCG in their 14 games played at the last 14 games played at the stadium. And I don't need to remind anyone listening to this podcast who the last and only team to lose to the Lions in those 14 games at the G was. Speaking of playing games at the MCG, on Friday night it will have been over a month since we last played at the G on King's birthday. Incidentally, that was the same weekend that the Lions played at the G, so we've played as many games at the G as Brisbane in the last month. The Lions sit in third place on the ladder, 2 games clear of the Demons in fourth place, and a win for the Demons is crucial to us retaining that small buffer that we have with the rest of the top 8. The stage is set for a blockbuster on Friday night that will let the whole AFL world know, whether, including Buckley, that the Ds are a chance in September or whether we're just making up the numbers. Demon WA says the Lions are notoriously weaker at the G, but we're not at our best and we're still missing Clary. Keen to hear what the panel sees as the keys to winning this match. If it's the midfield, can we afford to play track in the guts, or is that robbing us of the most likely goal-scoring option with no Fritsch? Seems to be a conundrum. Big man, what are the keys to winning this match?
Sorry for cutting your lunch, but I blame you, Andy, for discombobulating me with Buckley. Speaking of Buckley, also, they should give that audio to Lyon. I mean, where's the respect for St Kilda? Like, again, we didn't play Hawthorn. We played a team that was 5th on the ladder. Where's the respect for the team? And we beat them by 4 goals. The line in that game was 6 points or something. We beat that line by 3 goals better than what the punters and the bookies said we were going to. Total.
I think he was using their 3 men down.
The key to this game, I think, is winning the contest, getting back to scoring on turnover. Their problem with the MCG isn't a psychological problem. The problem with the MCG is it exposes their lack of leg speed. They're really slow. That's their problem. That's why Rich is gone back to Trainingsville. That's why the other fella, the ex-Hawthorn player, has gone back to they're a slow team.
He's back and he kicked 6 goals.
Yeah, against who?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who do they play?
The Eagles.
Oh,
yeah.
Right, okay.
Yes,
so,
yeah.
But he's going to cut us off. But yeah, I think that their biggest issue is their lack of leg speed. So I think that we'll be looking. Hopefully, we are close to optimal fitness, because the reference point is the game last year when we. The game in. Not the last year, in 21, which was the same round as this one coming up, and where we came out of a form slump and seemingly out of nowhere, we're running on top of the ground and smashed them. Remember, we beat them by 55 points, I think. And that was on the back of really spreading and really running in waves and
that was last year. We had lost those.
No,
3
that was
games
round 23 in last year, wasn't it?
We
Oh,
played
sorry,
them
sorry, yeah,
twice.
sorry. What am I
yeah.
saying? Last year, yeah, of
Yeah.
course. I'm getting mixing up my years. Yeah, exactly. So at the same time last year, where we'd come through a really poor slump and we came out of nowhere on the MCG and really looked to exploit their lack of run and their lack of leg speed. So I think we'll look to do that again. They've got their defense sorted a little bit. One of the things that with having such a reliance on your two key tools in Hipwood and Danaher is that, as George pointed out last year when we were talking about the Lions, is that, the problem with that is a good zone defense basically neuters those two and forces them both up outside the 50-metre arc where obviously they're not kicking goals. Their big strength over us, it continues to worry me, is the medium forward. So Cameron's the one people talk about, but it's the Bailey, McCluggages, it's those medium smalls pushing forward.
Lincoln McCarthy as well.
McCarthy,
Rayner.
yeah, exactly.
Now,
they're the
a
ones
question-
that give,
If you're talking about, you go ahead.
yeah, they're the ones that we've struggled with in the past and will struggle with again. McVie is a really important player, has become a really important player for that reason, because now he's locking down one of their best players. So I know there's a question there about
There is in a sec. I'll get to that, but I want to ask you before then, if Petty is injured and doesn't play, isn't able to play this week, do we bring in Tomlinson?
Yeah, of course.
Yes. I don't want.
Yeah.
I don't want Lever having to man, or we play that zone defence, but I prefer him playing that.
I don't think there's any question whatsoever about the preferred models, 3 tools. And so I was always saying Petty would go back, and then you convinced me, Andy, that he was going to play forward, and the next week he goes back. But
well, I was told he was.
But so I reckon if Petty goes out, and he looked pretty injured to me, so there's every chance. And Tomo played well, but mid-20s possession. So yeah, definitely Tomo will come back in, and but it's really those medium forwards, and so for us it's about stretching them on the pay, and much will depend on whether we've got run in our legs, I think, because we'll beat them in the contest. They're they're not that strong in contest, despite having some good contested players. They're full. All eggs in their basket is on winning clearances. So that'll be critical for us. They bring an extra to the stoppage. We don't. So it'll. George's point about Track likely to go into the middle. I think I can't see him playing that much forward when we need to win those clearances to beat Brisbane. That's really the key, I think.
Brisbane they were pretty awful given that they were playing the Eagles. I watched a little bit of the game, and it was like watching the junior football again. It was really open, not much pressure. I don't know what the pressure ratings were, but there wasn't much going on.
Big game, huh?
No, and what was really surprising to me though, and this is a problem we've had, they kicked 6 goals 13 from set shots in this game.
That's an AFL-wide issue.
Yeah, Danaher kicked 2 points for the game. Cameron kicked 2 points for the game. Hipwood only kicked 2 goals 3, and yet Gunston was able to kick 6 goals 2. And that was really the difference at the end of the game. Jack Gunston, for crying out loud, was probably the best reason that they won. So,
and he's a beautiful kick, isn't he?
Oh, he is, yeah. And most of it was simple marks and set shots. It wasn't because he was out getting the ball on his own, but they had huge numbers of opportunities, and they should have won by 180 points, but they didn't.
Well, thanks for telling me how inaccurate they were last week, because just got my MFCSS.
We'll kick 12 straight.
Yeah.
Now, Radelaide says, welcome back from your podcast bye. I hope your loading period is behind you now and you're all fresh for the run home and into finals. In terms of matchups for the upcoming match against the Lions on Friday night, who do you think will get the gig on? Charlie Cameron? Doesn't sound like Hibbo will be back this week. So who of the available players is a good matchup for Charlie? George, in the absence of Michael Hibbert, who takes Charlie Cameron?
I think it's quite simple. The way to stop Charlie Cameron is to stop the ball getting down there to him on his own. Yeah,
it doesn't happen
when he's flying like Cozzy is. You can't stop them. He's just that talented player.
The difference is he doesn't apply any pressure.
Yeah,
so you take him out of the game and he doesn't have an impact.
Yeah, and he looks for the cheapies out the back all the time. It looks fantastic when he does it. He is very fast, but it's all cheapies out the back, so you make sure the ball doesn't get down there.
Yeah.
So that's why, as been said, it's critical winning the contest in the middle to ensure that. I don't think there's a real threat from either Hipwood or Danaher as tall forwards. They just don't do enough work to justify the idolatry, or not idolatry, that they get, idolization that they get from the Brisbane crowds. Danaher's probably going to be used in the second ruck for small amounts, but we've got to win the middle basically and stop it getting into there. Cam Rayner's a bigger worry to me than what a Charlie Cameron is. He's playing good football at the moment, but as has been alluded to, I think McVie is a great match for that sort of player.
I reckon I'd love to see McVie get the job because he's earned it. Like he's done some huge jobs this week, so I fully expect him to line up on Charlie Cameron. The other key to beating Brisbane is that a huge part of their play is like they love to kick it into the pocket and then kick it to the wing, and they're really dependent on Hipwood and Danaher pushing up the ground and marking that ball. So we've got to make sure that we bring that ball to ground because it's already on the wing. They try to control territory through aerial strength, but we match up really well against Brisbane. Like a team like the Crows can push us, and same with the Pies because they can stretch us through just sheer running power and leg speed. But Lions can't, and so their strengths are our strengths. So we can beat them in the contest, we can beat them in the aerial. Their advantage over us, I think, is that sort of fleet of medium-sized players, like that we mentioned before. That really is their point of difference, and it concerns me every time we play them.
All right. Well, that's where I think we're going to leave it tonight. We've had a pretty long one. We'll be back next week, hopefully discussing another win. If you want to listen to that.
Andy, can I just be clear, though? What would be an acceptable win for you?
Against
points,
Brisbane,
2 points,
against a top side like
even if
Brisbane,
they have some injuries, even if some external events happen.
Can I tell you, I'll take any win. I don't care. It was the circumstances of them having 3 players down. I expected us to run all.
Will you accept a 5-point win?
No, I expected us to run over the top of them, and they took it right up to us, and that sort of disappointed me in a way. I'm not unhappy with the win.
I hope
wrapped with the win.
We win by 10 points with them having no one on the bench.
It was the circumstances, and it had me worried about our future in terms of this year. But we'll see. I'll take any win. I'll take a point. I'll take every, and I don't care if another team has every player out.
And for our listeners, make sure you're tuning in to the Bucks and Cornsey show this week when Bin Man calls in.
Hello, is this Cucks?
If you want to listen to the show live next week, then please head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers, Ross Millen and Brizzy D. Thank you to our voicemailer, Salty, that's your name now. Thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Bigfoot, Pew Pew Pew, Red and Blue Beard, Red and Blue Rising, Lefty, Buck Naked, Spirit of Norm Smith, Kiwi D, Monocular, Titus Totty, Smurf, Red Jacket, Scroll, Royal Demon, Man D Lorian, Oh My D's, Lazy, Demon WA, and Rad D Lade. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bimman. Thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Thank you to Kane Corns and Nathan Buckley. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, and we'll read them out on the next week's show. See you next week. Go Demons.
Go Tigers.